Picture this. You've just been transported back to 1837, the year a teenage queen named Victoria takes the throne and proceeds to give her name to 64 years of the most contradictory era in human history. Congratulations. You're now living in an age that will simultaneously invent the modern weekend and make sure you're too exhausted to enjoy it. Welcome to Victorian Britain, where having fun was like navigating a minefield of moral judgment, social class warfare, and economic brutality. This is the era that gave us Christmas cards and child labor, seaside holidays and 12-hour workdays, organized sports and organized misery. It's a time when your social class didn't just determine where you lived or what you ate. It dictated every single moment of your so-called leisure time. Here's what you need to understand about Victorian entertainment right from the start. There was no such thing as innocent fun. Every game had rules. Every activity had moral implications. And every moment of pleasure came with a side order of social anxiety. The Victorians didn't just enjoy themselves. They agonized over whether they should be enjoying themselves, how they should be enjoying themselves, and whether their neighbors were judging them for enjoying themselves incorrectly. But let's back up and set the scene properly, because you're going to need context for the magnificent absurdity you're about to witness. When Victoria became queen in 1837, Britain was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, that charming period when humanity decided that putting entire families to work in factories for 14 hours a day was progress. The majority of the population, we're talking about 80% of people, were working class, which meant they had about as much leisure time as a hamster on a wheel. Their idea of entertainment was collapsing in a bed after a day of not dying in a mine or textile mill. Then you had the rapidly expanding middle class, making up about 15 to 25% of the population by the end of the era. These were the people who'd climbed just high enough up the social ladder to be terrified of falling back down. For them, entertainment wasn't just fun. It was a performance of respectability. Every parlor game, every piano recital, every family reading session was a carefully choreographed display of moral superiority and cultural refinement. At the top, you had the upper class, maybe 5% of the population, who had so much money and so much time that they turned leisure into a full-time job. These people were so bored that they created elaborate social seasons, months-long house parties, and European tours that lasted years, all in a desperate attempt to fill the yawning void of their privileged existence. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean psychologically disturbing. The Victorians were obsessed with the idea that entertainment should be improving. Fun for fun's sake was suspicious. Pleasure without purpose was practically immoral. They coined the term rational recreation, which is possibly the most Victorian phrase ever invented. It basically meant that if you were going to enjoy yourself, you'd better be learning something or becoming a better person while you did it. This led to some spectacular mental gymnastics. Middle-class families would spend entire evenings playing charades, but not just any charades, elaborate, educational charades featuring historical events and moral lessons. They'd gather around the piano for family singing, but the songs had to be morally uplifting. They'd read together, but it better be Dickens or the Bible, not those scandalous penny dreadfuls that the working class were secretly devouring. The working class, meanwhile, had their own relationship with entertainment shaped primarily by exhaustion and poverty. When you're working 6 days a week from dawn to dusk, your entertainment needs are pretty basic. Somewhere warm to sit, something to drink, and maybe someone to complain to about your terrible life. Enter the pub, which wasn't just a bar. It was the working class's living room, community center, and entertainment venue all rolled into one. But even working class fun came with complications. The middle and upper classes were constantly trying to improve working-class leisure, creating mechanics institutes, temperance societies, and rational recreation programs designed to wean the poor off their vulgar pleasures and teach them to enjoy themselves properly. It was cultural imperialism disguised as charity, and about as welcome as you'd expect. The technological revolution was reshaping entertainment too, though not always in ways that made life more pleasant. The railway system, completed by the 1850s, meant that for the first time in human history, ordinary people could travel long distances for pleasure. This sounds great until you realize that Victorian trains were basically moving torture chambers. No heating, no cushions, and if you were traveling third class, no roof. But hey, at least you could get to the seaside to experience new forms of discomfort. Meanwhile, innovations like gaslighting were transforming cities, making evening entertainment possible for the first time. Music halls could stay open later, theaters could schedule evening performances, and families could extend their after-dinner activities. Of course, gaslighting also meant that your entertainment venues might explode without warning, adding an element of mortal danger to your evening out. The print revolution was creating the first mass media, with penny newspapers and penny dreadfuls bringing entertainment directly into people's homes. This terrified the establishment, who were convinced that cheap literature would corrupt the minds of the working class and lead to social revolution. They weren't entirely wrong. Access to information and entertainment did start changing social expectations in ways that made the ruling class very nervous. Perhaps most importantly, the Victorians were grappling with an entirely new concept: leisure time as a right rather than a privilege. The Factory Acts of the 1870s created the Saturday half-holiday, suddenly giving working people a concept that seems obvious to us but was revolutionary then: the weekend. Suddenly, millions of people had a few hours they could call their own, and nobody was quite sure what to do with them. This created the first modern entertainment industry. Entrepreneurs realized there was money to be made from people's desperate need for distraction. Music halls, seaside resorts, professional sports, pleasure gardens. All of these emerged because someone figured out how to monetize misery and sell it back as fun. But here's the thing that makes Victorian entertainment so fascinating and so deeply weird. It was all shaped by anxiety. The working class was anxious about survival, the middle class was anxious about respectability, and the upper class was anxious about maintaining their position. Every form of entertainment carried the weight of these fears. Consider the simple act of reading for pleasure. If you were working class and caught reading a penny dreadful, you were morally suspect. If you were middle class and caught reading a penny dreadful, you were socially ruined. If you were upper class, you probably couldn't read anything without wondering if it was beneath your dignity or above your intelligence. Or take dancing, one of humanity's most basic forms of entertainment. The Victorians managed to turn it into a minefield of social protocol. Wrong dance with the wrong person at the wrong time could destroy reputations, end engagements, and create social scandals that lasted for years. They literally had dance cards, paper programs that mapped out your evening's entertainment like a military operation. Even children's play was infected with this anxiety. Toys weren't just toys. They were training devices designed to prepare children for their adult roles. Girls got dolls and toy kitchens to practice domesticity. Boys got toy soldiers and construction sets to practice leadership in industry. Playing just for the joy of playing was discouraged as frivolous. The Victorians also invented the concept of gendered entertainment in ways that seem absurd today. Men could go to clubs, pubs, sporting events, and gambling halls. Women could sit in parlors and do needlework. Men could read newspapers and discuss politics. Women could read novels if they were morally instructive. Men could travel alone. Women couldn't leave the house without chaperones until they were married, and sometimes not even then. What makes all of this even more remarkable is that despite these constraints, or perhaps because of them, the Victorians created the foundation for virtually every form of modern entertainment. They invented organized sports, commercial tourism, mass media, celebrity culture, and the entertainment industry itself. They turned leisure from a traditional community activity into a commercial product, and we're still living with the consequences. So as we dive deeper into this world of Victorian fun, remember that you're not just learning about the past. You're learning about the origins of your own relationship with entertainment. Every time you binge-watch Netflix, scroll through social media, or plan a vacation, you're participating in patterns that the Victorians established. They may have been anxious, repressed, and obsessed with moral improvement, but they were also the people who figured out how to turn fun into an industry. And trust me, once you understand how they did it, your own leisure time will never look quite the same. Now that you understand the Victorian entertainment landscape, let's zoom in on the 80% of the population who were doing the actual work while everyone else worried about their moral improvement. Welcome to Working Class Leisure, where fun meant finding creative ways to forget that your life was essentially a Dickens novel without the happy ending. If you were working class in Victorian Britain, your relationship with entertainment was brutally simple. You had almost no time, almost no money, and almost no energy, but by God, you were going to squeeze every drop of pleasure out of the few hours you had left. Your entertainment options were limited, but what you lacked in variety, you made up for in intensity. When working people finally got a chance to enjoy themselves, they didn't mess around. Let's start with the crown jewel of working class entertainment, the pub. Now, before you start thinking, oh, how quaint, people like to drink, understand that the Victorian pub wasn't just a bar. It was the Amazon Prime, Netflix, Facebook, and community center of working class life all rolled into one smoky gin-soaked package. Picture this. You're a factory worker living in a boarding house with 6 other people in a room designed for 2. You work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in conditions that would horrify a modern health inspector. Your home is cold, crowded, and about as welcoming as a medieval dungeon. Where do you go for warmth, light, companionship, and the basic human dignity of sitting in a chair that isn't broken? The pub. The pub was where you got your news. Not from newspapers, which cost more than you could afford, but from other patrons who'd heard things at work or seen things on the street. It was where you conducted business, made connections, and sometimes found work. It was where you could sit by a fire without having to pay for coal, where you could use an actual toilet instead of a shared privy, and where you could pretend for a few hours that your life had some pleasure in it. But pubs weren't just drinking establishments. They were entertainment complexes. Most pubs had gardens out back where you could play skittles, quoits, or early versions of bowling. These games weren't just pastimes. They were the working class's version of sports clubs, complete with informal leagues and fierce rivalries between different pub teams. Imagine the passion of modern football fans, but focused on rolling balls at wooden pins while drinking warm ale. The pub was also where you'd find the earliest forms of professional entertainment. Before music halls became big business, you had pub entertainers, singers, storytellers, comedians, and musicians who'd perform for drinks and whatever coins the audience could spare. These weren't polished acts. They were rough, vulgar, and absolutely hilarious to people whose daily entertainment usually consisted of trying not to lose fingers in machinery. Speaking of music halls, let's talk about the Victorian entertainment revolution that changed everything: the rise of commercial popular culture. By the 1850s, entrepreneurs had figured out that there was serious money to be made from working-class desperation for fun. Music halls were the result. Purpose-built venues that took the chaotic energy of pub entertainment and turned it into a business model. For the price of a pint, about 2 to 3 pence, which was significant when you were earning 15 to 25 shillings a week, you could spend an entire evening in a warm, well-lit venue watching professional entertainers. The early music halls were basically pubs with stages, but by the 1870s, they'd evolved into sophisticated entertainment complexes that could hold 1,000 people. The entertainment was deliberately rowdy and participatory. Audiences didn't sit quietly like they would at a respectable theater. They sang along, shouted requests, heckled performers, and generally treated the whole thing like a massive community party. The songs were designed to be memorable and singable, often with choruses that everyone could join in. Think of it as karaoke, but with professional performers leading the crowd. The content was everything that respectable society found horrifying: sexual innuendo, political satire, mockery of authority figures, and celebration of working-class values that directly contradicted middle-class morality. Performers like Marie Lloyd became the first modern celebrities, known by millions of people who couldn't afford to see them perform but knew their songs from sheet music and street singers. Music halls were also democratic in a way that shocked Victorian sensibilities. Men and women attended together, different social classes mixed within limits, and the entertainment was unapologetically populist. This was culture created by and for ordinary people, and it terrified the establishment precisely because it was so successful. But music halls cost money, and even a few pence was a luxury for many working families. Free entertainment was where creativity really flourished. Street entertainment was everywhere. Organ grinders, puppet shows, acrobats, singers, and buskers of every description. These performers lived on whatever coins passers-by could spare, which meant they had to be good enough to make exhausted workers part with money they desperately needed. Traditional fairs were another crucial source of free or cheap entertainment, though many were being shut down by authorities who considered them disorderly and immoral. The fairs that survived were spectacular affairs featuring everything from horse racing and boxing matches to freak shows and carnival games. These weren't the sanitized, fun fairs we know today. They were chaotic, dangerous, and absolutely exhilarating events that broke up the monotony of industrial life. The real game changer for working-class leisure came in 1874 with the Factory Act that created the Saturday half-holiday. Suddenly, millions of workers had Saturday afternoon off, possibly the first regular leisure time many of them had ever experienced. The question was, what do you do with freedom when you've never had it before? The answer, for many, was football. The Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff time isn't an arbitrary tradition. It was specifically designed to accommodate workers who finished at 1 p.m. on Saturdays. Football was perfect working-class entertainment. It was free to watch initially. It was exciting. It gave people tribal loyalties that transcended their immediate circumstances, and it provided a socially acceptable outlet for the aggression that built up from 6 days of industrial drudgery. Early football crowds were notoriously rowdy. These weren't polite spectators. They were people who'd been bottling up frustration all week and finally had a chance to express it. The atmosphere was more like a riot than a sporting event, which is probably why football became known as the people's game, while cricket remained the gentleman's game. The railway revolution also opened up new possibilities for working-class entertainment. For the first time in history, ordinary people could afford to travel long distances for pleasure. Thomas Cook's early package tours weren't aimed at the wealthy. They were designed for working people who wanted to see the sea or visit relatives in other cities. A railway excursion to Brighton or Blackpool became the working-class equivalent of the upper-class grand tour. These trips were organizational marvels. Entire factories, churches, or neighborhoods would organize group excursions, with special trains chartered to carry hundreds of people to seaside resorts for a day of unprecedented freedom. Imagine the excitement of people who'd never been more than a few miles from their birthplace, suddenly finding themselves at the ocean, eating ice cream, and breathing clean air. Of course, the middle and upper classes were horrified by these developments. Working people enjoying themselves loudly and publicly, spending money on pleasure instead of saving every penny, gathering in large groups without supervision. This was dangerous stuff. The response was a campaign for rational recreation, designed to redirect working-class leisure toward activities that would make them better workers and more moral citizens. Mechanics institutes offered evening classes and lectures. Temperance societies provided alcohol-free entertainment alternatives. Churches organized sports clubs and social events. Library societies promoted improving literature. All of these efforts were well-intentioned, but they missed the fundamental point. Working people didn't want to be improved. They wanted to forget, to escape, to experience pleasure without judgment or instruction. The tension between working-class entertainment preferences and middle-class reform efforts created some bizarre cultural contradictions. You'd have mechanics institutes offering lectures on scientific subjects to audiences who just wanted to sing drinking songs. You'd have temperance halls trying to compete with pubs by offering alcohol-free entertainment that was deliberately designed to be less fun than the alternative. Religious organizations were particularly conflicted about working-class leisure. On one hand, they wanted to provide moral alternatives to pubs and music halls. On the other hand, most forms of popular entertainment seemed sinful by religious standards. The result was a compromised culture of church socials, choir practices, and sacred concerts that try to split the difference between fun and virtue. What's remarkable about working-class Victorian entertainment is how much of it survived and evolved into modern popular culture. Music halls became vaudeville, which became television variety shows. Pub games became organized sports leagues. Street entertainment became busking, which became YouTube performance culture. Working-class singers became recording artists, and their audiences became mass media consumers. But perhaps most importantly, working-class Victorians established the principle that entertainment was a necessity, not a luxury. Despite having almost nothing, they found ways to create joy, community, and cultural expression. They proved that people will find ways to have fun even under the most oppressive circumstances, and that popular culture is too powerful a force to be controlled by social reformers or moral authorities. This was entertainment as resistance, pleasure as political act, and fun as fundamental human right. Lessons that would echo through every subsequent generation of people fighting for the right to enjoy themselves on their own terms. While working-class Victorians were creating authentic popular culture in pubs and music halls, there was another group of people having a very different relationship with entertainment. These are the middle classes, that anxious, aspiring segment of society who'd clawed their way up from poverty and were absolutely terrified of sliding back down. For them, entertainment wasn't about escape or genuine pleasure. It was about performance, respectability, and proving to the world that they deserved their precarious social position. Welcome to the middle-class parlor, where fun went to die a slow, morally improving death. If working-class entertainment was about forgetting your troubles, middle-class entertainment was about advertising your virtue. Every game, every song, every book, every hobby was carefully calibrated to send the message. We are respectable people who deserve to be taken seriously. The result was a form of leisure that was simultaneously elaborate and exhausting, cultured and completely joyless. Let's start with the crown jewel of middle-class domestic entertainment, the piano. In Victorian middle-class homes, the piano wasn't just a musical instrument. It was a furniture-sized billboard announcing your family's cultural aspirations and economic status. By the 1890s, it was estimated that a middle-class parlor without a piano was like a greeting without a smile, which tells you everything you need to know about how mandatory this particular form of torture had become. The piano represented a massive financial investment for middle-class families, often costing the equivalent of several months' income. But that was almost beside the point. You didn't buy a piano because you particularly wanted to make music. You bought it because not having one marked you as either too poor or too uncultured to belong in respectable society. It was conspicuous consumption disguised as artistic appreciation. But here's where the middle-class anxiety really shows. Once you had the piano, everyone in the family was expected to play it, whether they had talent or inclination or not. The piano became the center of mandatory family entertainment sessions that combined the worst aspects of performance pressure with the deadly boredom of amateur music making. Picture the scene. Every evening after dinner, the family would gather around the piano for what they called musical entertainment. Daughter would play while everyone else sang along to morally uplifting songs with titles like Home, Sweet Home, and Angels Ever Bright and Fair. These weren't fun sing-alongs. They were cultural exercises designed to demonstrate the family's moral fiber and artistic sensibilities. The repertoire was carefully curated to avoid anything that might be considered vulgar or exciting. No music hall songs, no drinking songs, no love ballads that might inflame dangerous passions. Instead, you got endless variations on themes of home, virtue, religion, and patriotic duty. It was music specifically designed to be inoffensive, which is another way of saying it was music designed to be boring. But the piano was just the beginning of middle-class parlor entertainment. These people had turned the simple act of playing games into a form of competitive virtue, signaling that would make modern social media look restrained. Take charades, for example. Today, charades might involve acting out movie titles or celebrity names. Victorian middle-class charades were elaborate theatrical productions featuring historical events, literary classics, moral lessons, and improving themes. Players were expected to demonstrate their education, cultural knowledge, and moral sophistication through their performances. It wasn't enough to guess Hamlet. You had to show that you understood the deeper philosophical implications of Hamlet while gracefully acknowledging the superior performance skills of your fellow players. The costumes alone could take hours to prepare. Victorian charades often involved full-period dress, props, and carefully choreographed scenes that resembled amateur theatrical productions more than party games. Families would spend entire afternoons preparing for an evening's entertainment that was essentially competitive education disguised as fun. Even more elaborate were the tableaux vivants, living pictures where groups of people would recreate famous paintings, historical scenes, or literary moments by posing in carefully arranged still-life compositions. This was essentially the Victorian equivalent of Instagram, except instead of taking a quick selfie, you had to hold absolutely still for several minutes while wearing uncomfortable costumes and trying to embody the moral significance of whatever scene you were representing. Popular tableau subjects included biblical scenes. The Last Supper was a favorite. Historical moments, the death of Nelson. Famous paintings, particularly anything by Raphael or other morally instructive artists, and scenes from improving literature. The more obscure and educational your reference, the more social points you scored. These performances weren't spontaneous fun. They were carefully planned cultural events that required extensive preparation, research, and coordination. Families would spend weeks planning their tableaus, studying the original sources, designing costumes, and rehearsing their poses. It was entertainment that required more work than most people's actual jobs. Reading culture provides another perfect example of middle-class entertainment anxiety. The Victorian era saw an explosion in literacy rates and cheap publishing, which should have been an unqualified good thing. But for the middle classes, this created a new form of social terror. What if people read the wrong books? The result was a complex hierarchy of acceptable literature that turned the simple pleasure of reading into a minefield of social judgment. At the top were improving books, serious literature, moral instruction, religious texts, and educational works. In the middle were novels by respectable authors like Charles Dickens or George Eliot, which were acceptable because they contained moral lessons and social commentary. At the bottom were penny dreadfuls, sensation novels, and anything that prioritized entertainment over improvement. Middle-class families developed elaborate strategies for navigating this literary landscape. They would subscribe to circulating libraries that specialized in suitable fiction. They would organize family reading sessions where improving books were read aloud, ensuring that everyone consumed the same morally beneficial content. They would even create family book clubs and literary discussion groups, turning reading into yet another form of competitive virtue display. But here's the thing that makes this particularly absurd. Everyone was secretly reading the wrong books. Middle-class ladies were hiding sensation novels inside their sewing baskets. Middle-class gentlemen were reading penny dreadfuls on their commutes. Children were trading forbidden adventure stories like contraband. The entire system was built on public pretense and private hypocrisy. The same pattern played out in the realm of collecting hobbies, where the middle classes turned the simple pleasure of accumulating interesting objects into elaborate displays of cultural sophistication and scientific seriousness. Take Pteridomania, Fernmania, which swept through middle-class Victorian society like a particularly genteel plague. This wasn't just people liking plants. This was a full-scale cultural obsession that combined scientific pretension, artistic aspiration, and domestic decoration into one socially acceptable package. Middle-class women, because this was considered a particularly feminine pursuit, would spend enormous amounts of time and money collecting, cultivating, and displaying ferns in elaborate glass cases called Wardian cases. They would study botanical classification systems, learn Latin names, and correspond with other collectors to trade specimens. They would create artistic arrangements, press ferns for albums, and turn their homes into miniature botanical museums. This sounds like harmless fun until you realize the pressure involved. Your fern collection was a public display of your scientific education, artistic sensibility, and domestic sophistication. A poorly maintained collection or inferior specimens reflected badly on your character and social status. Women would compete fiercely over rare varieties, spend significant portions of their household budgets on new specimens, and judge each other's collections with the ruthlessness of art critics. Stamp collecting followed similar patterns when the penny black was introduced in 1840. What started as a practical way to save and reuse postage quickly evolved into a complex hobby that combined geographic education, historical knowledge, and economic investment. Middle-class collectors would organize elaborate classification systems, join collecting societies, and trade stamps with the seriousness of international diplomats. Even children's entertainment was infected with this anxiety about improvement and respectability. Middle-class children couldn't just play. They had to engage in activities that prepared them for their adult roles while demonstrating their family's cultural values. Girls were given elaborate dollhouses that were essentially training devices for domestic management, complete with miniature furniture, servants, and social scenarios that taught proper household organization. Boys received educational toys like building sets, chemistry kits, and toy soldiers that emphasized leadership, scientific thinking, and imperial duty. Board games were designed to teach geography, history, and moral lessons. Popular games had titles like The Cottage of Content and The New Game of Human Life, and featured elaborate moral instruction disguised as entertainment. Even simple games like Spillikins, Pickup Sticks, were promoted for their benefits in developing manual dexterity and patience. Magic lantern shows represented the height of middle-class family entertainment technology. These were elaborate slide projection devices that allowed families to present educational and entertaining programs in their own homes. But like everything else in middle-class leisure, Magic lantern shows came with careful content curation designed to ensure proper moral and educational impact. Slide libraries offered thousands of images covering travel, history, literature, science, and moral instruction. Families would organize formal evening presentations, complete with narration and discussion, turning entertainment into educational experience. The most popular slide sets combined spectacular visual imagery with improving content. Holy Land tours, Shakespeare adaptations, scientific demonstrations, and moral allegories. What makes all of this particularly tragic is that beneath the surface performance, middle-class Victorians were often desperately hungry for genuine fun and authentic cultural experience. The enormous popularity of music halls among middle-class audiences, who attended anonymously or in disguise, suggests that all this respectable entertainment wasn't actually satisfying anyone's real desires for pleasure and escape. The middle-class entertainment system was built on a fundamental contradiction. It promised pleasure while delivering anxiety, offered leisure while demanding work, and created community while enforcing competition. It was fun designed by people who were afraid of fun, for people who needed fun but couldn't admit they wanted it. This anxiety-ridden approach to leisure would have lasting consequences, establishing patterns of competitive consumption, cultural gatekeeping, and leisure as social performance that continue to shape entertainment culture today. Every time someone curates their social media presence to look more cultured, every time someone reads a book because they think they should rather than because they want to, every time someone chooses entertainment based on what it says about them rather than what they actually enjoy, they're participating in patterns that anxious Victorian middle-class families established in their desperate quest for respectability. The parlor may have been abandoned, but the prison of respectable entertainment lives on. If middle-class Victorians were trapped in parlors by their anxiety about respectability, the upper classes faced an even more existential problem. What do you do when you have unlimited time, unlimited money, and unlimited social pressure to fill both with something that looks like sophisticated enjoyment? The answer, as it turns out, was to create the most elaborate, expensive, and ultimately soul-crushing entertainment system in human history. Welcome to upper-class Victorian leisure, where boredom was an art form and suffering was a luxury good. Here's the fundamental paradox of aristocratic entertainment. When you can afford anything, nothing has value. When you can go anywhere, nowhere seems worth visiting. When you can do anything, nothing feels worth doing. The upper classes solve this problem by turning leisure into work, specifically the full-time job of maintaining their social position through conspicuous consumption of culturally appropriate pleasures. The result was a system of mandatory fun that made middle-class parlor games look spontaneous and working-class pub culture look liberated. This was entertainment as social obligation, pleasure as political performance, and leisure as a form of competitive imprisonment. Let's start with the crown jewel of upper-class social torture, the London season. From April through July, wealthy families were expected to maintain residences in London and participate in a relentless calendar of balls, dinner parties, opera performances, and social calls that would exhaust a modern event planner. This wasn't optional recreation. It was the primary method by which upper-class families maintained their political connections, arranged marriages for their children, and demonstrated their continued relevance in a rapidly changing world. The season was built around a series of mandatory social events that everyone attended not because they were enjoyable, but because not attending would signal social irrelevance or financial distress. The opening of Parliament, the Royal Academy Exhibition, Ascot races, Henley Regatta, Wimbledon tennis championships. These weren't entertainment options. They were social obligations that required months of preparation and enormous financial investment. Consider the economics of participating in the season. A wealthy family needed to maintain a London townhouse year-round, even though they only used it for 4 months. They needed a full domestic staff, multiple carriages, extensive wardrobes for both formal and informal occasions, and entertainment budgets that could fund small armies. A single ball could cost more than a working-class family earned in a decade, and families were expected to host multiple events while attending dozens of others. But the real cost wasn't financial, it was psychological. The season operated on a rigid social protocol that made chess look like a simple game. Every invitation accepted or declined, every conversation partner chosen, every dress worn to every event carried social and political implications that could affect family fortunes for generations. Mothers spent months maneuvering to secure advantageous marriage opportunities for their daughters. Fathers used social events to conduct business and political negotiations. Children were trained from infancy in the complex etiquette required to navigate this social minefield successfully. The entertainment itself was secondary to the social performance required to participate properly. Opera attendance, for example, wasn't really about enjoying music. It was about demonstrating cultural sophistication while networking with other influential families. Private boxes cost hundreds of pounds annually, but the real expense was the elaborate preparation required for each performance. Appropriate dress, careful study of the program to enable intelligent conversation, strategic planning of intermission socializing, and post-performance social obligations. Even more exhausting were the country house parties that dominated upper-class entertainment from August through March. These weren't casual weekend visits. They were elaborate, multi-day productions that combined hospitality, politics, sport, and social maneuvering into marathon endurance tests of upper-class stamina. A typical country house party might last anywhere from a long weekend to several weeks, with guests arriving according to carefully orchestrated schedules and participating in activities planned with military precision. Morning might feature elaborate shooting parties, where dozens of beaters would drive game birds toward guests who would compete to demonstrate their marksmanship while conducting political negotiations between shots. Afternoon could include outdoor activities like croquet tournaments, tennis matches, or organized walks through carefully landscaped grounds designed to showcase the host's artistic sensibilities and financial resources. Evenings were even more elaborate, featuring multi-course dinners that could last for hours, followed by entertainment programs that might include amateur theatricals, musical performances, or elaborate party games. But the real entertainment was the complex social dynamics playing out beneath the surface. The marriage negotiations, political alliances, business arrangements, and social rivalries that used leisure activities as cover for serious adult business. The sporting activities that dominated country house entertainment reveal the bizarre relationship between upper-class leisure and actual enjoyment. Take fox hunting, which was elevated to almost religious significance in upper-class culture despite being fundamentally absurd as entertainment. The activity required massive financial investment. Hunters needed multiple horses, elaborate equipment, and extensive knowledge of hunting protocol to participate in what was essentially an elaborate excuse for wealthy people to chase small animals across the countryside while dressed in ridiculous costumes. But fox hunting wasn't really about the fox or even the chase. It was about demonstrating your membership in an exclusive social group that could afford to maintain this expensive tradition. The real entertainment was the social hierarchy expressed through hunting protocol, the networking opportunities provided by hunt breakfasts and post-hunt celebrations, and the display of wealth represented by your horse, equipment, and hunting attire. Grouse shooting followed similar patterns, with the glorious 12th of August marking the beginning of the shooting season and the migration of wealthy families to Scottish estates for weeks of ritualized bird slaughter. The shooting itself was almost incidental to the elaborate social machinery required to support it. The armies of beaters, the elaborate lunches served on the moors, the evening entertainments designed around displaying the day's kill. These activities were expensive enough to exclude anyone who wasn't genuinely wealthy, which was precisely the point. When your entertainment requires maintaining multiple country estates, breeding and training hunting horses, employing dozens of servants, and investing in specialized equipment that costs more than most people's annual income, you've successfully created a leisure activity that serves as an effective social filter. For young upper-class men, the ultimate entertainment obligation was the Grand Tour, a multi-year educational journey through Europe that combined cultural improvement with extended adolescence. This wasn't a holiday. It was a rite of passage that could last 2 to 3 years and cost enough to buy a substantial estate. The Grand Tour followed an established route through France, Switzerland, and Italy, with extended stops in Paris, Rome, Naples, Venice, and Florence. Young men traveled with tutors, servants, and elaborate luggage trains, staying in accommodations arranged through networks of aristocratic connections. The supposed purpose was cultural education, studying classical art and architecture, learning modern languages, and developing the sophisticated European perspective considered essential for future leadership roles. But the reality was often an extended exercise in expensive boredom. As privileged young men wandered through museums and historical sites they weren't particularly interested in, attended social events with people they had nothing in common with, and tried to fill months of unstructured time with activities that looked appropriately improving to the relatives funding their travels. The journals and letters that survive from Grand Tour participants reveal a consistent pattern of homesickness, boredom, and anxiety about meeting family expectations. Many spent their time abroad gambling, drinking, and pursuing romantic adventures that would have scandalized their families, while dutifully writing letters home about their cultural discoveries and educational progress. Back in Britain, upper-class men who weren't traveling could retreat to the exclusive gentlemen's clubs that served as their primary urban entertainment venues. Clubs like White's, Brooks's, and Boodle's charged membership fees that excluded anyone without substantial independent income, creating private spaces where wealthy men could gamble, dine, read newspapers, and conduct business away from family obligations and social protocol. But even these supposedly relaxing environments operated according to rigid social hierarchies and behavioral codes. Club membership was hereditary or required sponsorship from existing members, creating elaborate systems of social gatekeeping. The entertainment consisted primarily of gambling at stakes that could bankrupt estates, drinking expensive alcohol, and engaging in political discussions that often determined national policy. The gambling culture that dominated these clubs reveals the fundamental emptiness at the heart of upper-class entertainment. When you have so much money that ordinary pleasures lose their appeal, the only way to create excitement is through the possibility of spectacular loss. Club gambling involved stakes that could transfer ownership of entire estates in a single evening, creating artificial drama and risk in lives that were otherwise insulated from genuine consequence. What makes upper-class Victorian entertainment particularly tragic is how little genuine pleasure it provided to the people participating in it. The letters, diaries, and memoirs of upper-class Victorians are filled with complaints about boredom, social obligations, and the exhausting demands of maintaining their position. They had created a system that consumed enormous resources, required constant performance, and delivered very little authentic enjoyment to anyone involved. The seasonal migration between London and country estates, the elaborate preparation required for social events, the complex etiquette governing every interaction, the pressure to maintain multiple residences and entertainment venues. All of this created a lifestyle that was simultaneously luxurious and imprisoning. Perhaps most tellingly, many upper-class Victorians found their most genuine entertainment in activities that temporarily allowed them to escape their social obligations. Anonymous attendance at music halls, traveling incognito to experience working-class entertainments, or pursuing hobbies that had no social significance provided relief from the relentless pressure of aristocratic leisure. The upper classes had solved the problem of having too much money and too much time by creating entertainment systems so elaborate and demanding that they required full-time attention to navigate successfully. They had turned leisure into labor, pleasure into performance, and fun into a form of competitive social imprisonment that made working-class poverty look like freedom. This was entertainment as conspicuous consumption, leisure as political theater, and pleasure as social obligation. A system that established patterns of elite cultural performance that continue to shape how wealth and status are displayed through recreational choices today. If you thought upper-class Victorian entertainment was already sufficiently complicated by social obligations and competitive cultural performance, wait until you discover how the Victorians managed to make leisure even more restrictive by dividing every single recreational activity along gender lines. Welcome to the doctrine of separate spheres, where men and women weren't just expected to work in different worlds. They were required to have fun in completely different universes. This wasn't just social preference. It was a carefully constructed system of gender apartheid that turned every entertainment choice into a political statement about your biological destiny. The Victorians had managed to take the simple human desire for pleasure and recreation and transform it into an elaborate reinforcement mechanism for patriarchal control. It was social engineering disguised as moral guidance, and it made everyone's leisure time infinitely more complicated and significantly less enjoyable. The basic principle was deceptively simple. Men belonged in the public sphere, women belonged in the domestic sphere, and never the twain should meet for recreational purposes. But like most Victorian social rules, the simplicity was deceptive. The reality was a Byzantine system of restrictions, exceptions, and contradictions that required constant vigilance to navigate successfully. For men, the public sphere meant access to virtually every form of entertainment that Victorian society had to offer. Gentlemen's clubs, public houses, sporting events, political gatherings, professional associations, business dinners, gambling establishments, smoking rooms, and basically anywhere that interesting conversations might occur. All of this was not just available to men, but was considered essential to their proper social development. Men could read newspapers and discuss current events. They could engage in political debate. They could travel alone for business or pleasure. They could attend theatrical performances, musical events, and cultural exhibitions. They could participate in sports, either as players or spectators. They could join professional societies, hobby clubs, and social organizations. They could gamble, drink, smoke, and engage in all manner of vices that were considered normal expressions of masculine nature. For women, the domestic sphere meant, well, whatever was left after men had claimed everything interesting. Women's entertainment was supposed to center around the home, family, and activities that prepared them for their biological destiny as wives and mothers. This sounds restrictive enough, but the Victorians managed to make it even more limiting by insisting that women's leisure activities be morally improving, domestically useful, and completely devoid of anything that might overstimulate their delicate feminine sensibilities. The result was a recreational apartheid that would be absurd if it weren't so systematically enforced. Consider reading, one of the most basic forms of entertainment. Men could read anything they wanted: newspapers, political journals, scientific treatises, adventure novels, even the despised penny dreadfuls if they chose. Women's reading was carefully monitored and restricted to ensure they didn't encounter ideas that might damage their moral purity or domestic focus. Women could read novels, but only if they were morally instructive and didn't contain excessive passion or excitement. They could read religious texts and moral guidance literature. They could read domestic advice books and child-rearing manuals. They could read poetry, but preferably nothing too sensual or emotionally stirring. They absolutely could not read newspapers regularly, as political information was considered harmful to feminine nature. They couldn't read scientific or philosophical texts, as intellectual stimulation might interfere with their reproductive function. The arbitrary nature of these restrictions reveals their true purpose. It wasn't actually about protecting women's morality. It was about maintaining male control over information, culture, and social discourse. By restricting women's access to current events, political discussion, and intellectual debate, Victorian society ensured that women remained dependent on men for their understanding of the world beyond the domestic sphere. Music provides another perfect example of how gender restrictions transformed entertainment into social control. Both men and women were expected to be musical, but their musical activities were carefully segregated to reinforce gender roles and social hierarchies. Women were expected to play piano and sing, but only for private family entertainment or small social gatherings. Their repertoire was restricted to morally uplifting songs, classical pieces, and domestic ballads that celebrated home, family, and feminine virtue. They could perform for their families and close friends, but public performance was considered tantamount to professional prostitution. No respectable woman would display herself for the entertainment of strangers. Men, meanwhile, could participate in musical activities that women were forbidden: singing clubs, amateur orchestras, public performances, and professional musical careers. They could attend musical events unchaperoned, engage with professional musicians, and participate in the business side of musical culture. Most importantly, they could be audience members at public musical performances, giving them access to the vibrant music hall culture that was transforming popular entertainment. The chaperoning system represents the Victorian gender entertainment complex at its most absurd and controlling. Middle and upper-class women couldn't attend virtually any entertainment venue without constant supervision, which meant that their leisure activities were limited to whatever their chaperones were willing and able to supervise. This created a bizarre economy of entertainment restriction. Young women could attend balls, but only with chaperones who monitored their dance partners, conversation topics, and social interactions. They could attend theater performances, but only in family groups or with approved companions. They could visit friends, but only during prescribed calling hours and with advance arrangements. They could take walks for exercise, but only in appropriate locations and with suitable company. The courtship process reveals how these gender restrictions turned even romantic entertainment into an elaborate system of social surveillance. Young men and women couldn't simply meet, spend time together, and get to know each other through shared recreational activities. Instead, courtship was conducted through a series of highly regulated entertainment opportunities that allowed minimal genuine interaction while maximizing social control. Balls and formal dances provided one of the few opportunities for young people to interact, but even these were hedged with restrictions. Women couldn't dance more than 2 dances with the same partner without causing scandal. They couldn't initiate conversations with men they hadn't been formally introduced to. They couldn't express preferences for particular partners or activities. They certainly couldn't arrange private meetings or unchaperoned entertainment. The calling system that governed middle and upper-class social interaction was entertainment designed by people who were terrified of spontaneous human connection. Young men could call on young women, but only during prescribed hours, in the presence of family members, and according to elaborate protocols that govern conversation topics, visit duration, and social obligations. Even engagement, supposedly the period when couples could enjoy each other's company while planning their future together, was subject to restrictions that would seem insane today. Engaged couples could spend time together, but still required chaperoning. The man had to leave before dark, even if he was engaged to marry the woman he was visiting. They could exchange letters, but family members often read their correspondence to ensure appropriate content. Children's entertainment was shaped by gender expectations from the earliest age, with toys and activities designed to prepare boys and girls for their separate adult spheres. This wasn't subtle social conditioning, it was explicit training for gender-segregated adult roles. Girls received dolls, toy kitchens, miniature household items, and sewing supplies that trained them for domestic management. Their games emphasized nurturing, cooperation, and domestic skills. They were given books about domestic heroines and moral exemplars. Their entertainment was designed to be quiet, indoor-focused, and centered around family relationships. Boys received toy soldiers, construction sets, scientific instruments, and adventure books that prepared them for public leadership and professional careers. Their games emphasized competition, strategic thinking, and physical challenges. They were given books about exploration, military heroes, and intellectual achievement. Their entertainment was designed to be active, outdoor-focused, and centered around individual achievement and group leadership. The gender segregation even extended to seemingly innocent activities like card games. Women could play cards, but only certain types of card games that didn't involve gambling or excessive competition. They could play whist for small stakes or no stakes at all. They could participate in family card games that emphasized social interaction over winning. They absolutely could not participate in the serious gambling that was a central feature of male club culture. Sports participation reveals the gender entertainment system at its most hypocritical. Men could participate in virtually any sporting activity as players or spectators. They could engage in violent sports like boxing and rugby. They could participate in dangerous sports like hunting and horse racing. They could gather in large groups to watch sporting events and express themselves loudly and physically. Women's sporting opportunities were severely limited by concerns about physical exertion, competitive spirit, and public display. They could engage in appropriate physical activities like croquet, archery, and some forms of dancing, but only if these activities didn't require excessive movement, competitive behavior, or public performance. Even tennis, when it was introduced in the 1870s, was controversial because it required women to move quickly and compete directly against opponents. The bicycle craze of the 1890s created a major crisis in the gender entertainment system because cycling was simultaneously practical transportation, healthy exercise, and tremendous fun. But it required women to wear practical clothing, travel independently, and appear in public engaged in vigorous physical activity. The social controversy over women cycling reveals how the gender restrictions were really about controlling female mobility and independence, not protecting feminine delicacy. What makes the Victorian gender entertainment system particularly insidious is how it was justified through supposedly scientific claims about biological differences. Women were supposedly too delicate for intellectual stimulation, too emotional for political discussion, too pure for exposure to vulgar entertainment, and too weak for competitive activities. These weren't presented as social preferences. They were presented as medical necessities required to protect women's health and society's stability. The reality, of course, was that the gender entertainment restrictions served male interests by maintaining their monopoly on public life, political power, and cultural authority. By confining women to domestic entertainment and limiting their access to public culture, Victorian society ensured that women remained economically dependent and politically powerless. The psychological cost of these restrictions was enormous. The letters and diaries of Victorian women are filled with complaints about boredom, frustration, and longing for more interesting and stimulating activities. Many women found ways to subvert the restrictions, reading forbidden books, attending public entertainments in disguise, or finding excuses to participate in activities that were technically outside their prescribed sphere. but the system was designed to make subversion difficult and dangerous. Women who violated gender entertainment norms faced social ostracism, family disapproval, and damage to their marriage prospects. The stakes were high enough that most women complied with restrictions that made their leisure time significantly less enjoyable and fulfilling than men's. The Victorian gender entertainment system established patterns of recreational segregation and female restriction that persisted well into the 20th century and continue to influence entertainment culture today. Every time someone questions whether women belong in certain recreational spaces, every time gender-specific restrictions are justified through claims about biological differences, every time women's entertainment preferences are dismissed as less serious or significant than men's, the ghost of Victorian gender apartheid lives on. The separate spheres may have crumbled, but the assumption that men and women naturally want different things from their leisure time, and that men's preferences should be considered more important, remains a stubborn legacy of Victorian entertainment culture. Just when you thought Victorian entertainment couldn't get any more complicated, what with its class hierarchies, gender restrictions, and moral anxiety, along came the most disruptive force of all, technology. The Victorian era wasn't just a time of social transformation. It was the first period in human history when technological innovation began reshaping entertainment faster than society could figure out how to regulate it properly. The result was a fascinating collision between traditional moral constraints and revolutionary new possibilities that nobody quite knew how to handle. While Victorian families were still arguing about whether women should be allowed to read newspapers and whether working-class people deserved leisure time, inventors were creating entirely new forms of entertainment that would make these debates irrelevant. Magic lanterns were bringing moving pictures into parlors. Phonographs were preserving and reproducing human voices. Photography was democratizing portraiture, and steam-powered printing presses were making information and entertainment available to the masses at unprecedented speed and scale. The technological revolution in entertainment wasn't just about new gadgets. It was about the fundamental disruption of social control systems that had governed leisure for centuries. When entertainment could be mass-produced, mechanically reproduced, and distributed without traditional gatekeepers, the careful social hierarchies that shaped Victorian recreational life began to crumble. Technology was democratizing pleasure, and the establishment was not pleased. Let's start with the magic lantern, which was essentially Victorian Netflix delivered through a combination of advanced optics and mortal danger. These devices used everything from candles to dangerous limelight, literally burning lime, to produce brilliant illumination, to project images onto walls or screens, creating the first form of home cinema entertainment. The magic lantern industry reveals how quickly Victorian entrepreneurs figured out how to monetize technological innovation. By the 1820s, commercial slide libraries were offering rental services that provided complete evening entertainment packages. Opticians, photographers, and stationers maintained extensive collections of slides covering every conceivable topic: fairy tales for children, travel scenes for armchair explorers, ghost stories for thrill seekers, educational content for improving families, and even early forms of adult entertainment for customers who knew how to ask discreetly. The sophistication of magic lantern technology was remarkable. Advanced devices could project multiple overlapping images, create movement through mechanical slide systems, and produce color effects that rivaled modern cinema. The best magic lantern shows featured elaborate narratives, musical accompaniment, and live narration that transformed static images into immersive storytelling experiences. But here's where Victorian social anxiety collided with technological possibility. Magic lanterns were simultaneously educational tools and potential moral hazards. Families could use them to provide improving entertainment, geographical education through travel slides, historical instruction through historical scenes, religious improvement through biblical narratives. But the same technology could project images that might overstimulate young minds, expose children to inappropriate content, or provide entertainment that was purely pleasurable without being morally beneficial. The solution was characteristically Victorian: elaborate content curation systems that turned technological freedom into social control. Slide libraries carefully categorized their collections into appropriate and inappropriate content. Rental companies marketed themselves based on their moral reliability rather than their entertainment value. Families developed elaborate protocols for slide selection and show content that ensured their magic lantern entertainment remained socially acceptable. The result was a technology that could do almost anything, being used primarily for very safe, very predictable, very boring educational entertainment. It was like having access to the internet, but only using it to read improving literature and look at maps. Edison's phonograph, introduced in 1877, created an even more dramatic disruption in entertainment culture. For the first time in human history, sound could be preserved, reproduced, and shared independent of live performance. The implications were staggering, but nobody quite understood what they were witnessing. The Edison Speaking Phonograph Company, established in 1878, initially marketed the technology for practical applications: letter dictation, voice preservation for families, educational recording, and legal documentation. But the entertainment applications quickly became obvious, and they terrified traditional cultural gatekeepers. Live musical performance had always been subject to social control through venue ownership, performer licensing, and audience management. You could control who heard what by controlling who could perform where and who could attend which performances. But recorded music could travel anywhere, be played for anyone, and escape the social supervision that governed live entertainment. The early phonograph industry reveals the same pattern we've seen throughout Victorian entertainment: technological possibility constrained by social anxiety. Early recording companies focused heavily on respectable content: classical music, moral speeches, educational recordings, and religious material. The technology that could preserve any sound was initially used primarily to preserve sounds that reinforced existing cultural hierarchies and moral standards. But technology has a way of escaping social control, and by the 1880s, phonographs were being used to distribute exactly the kind of popular entertainment that respectable society was trying to suppress. Music hall songs, comic sketches, ethnic humor, and various forms of adult entertainment found their way onto phonograph cylinders, creating a black market in recorded pleasure that operated outside traditional social supervision. Photography represented another technological revolution that transformed entertainment while creating new forms of social anxiety. Early Victorian photography required long exposure times and expensive equipment, limiting it to formal portraiture and special occasions. But as technology improved and costs decreased, photography began to democratize visual representation in ways that disrupted established social hierarchies. For the first time, ordinary families could afford to document their leisure activities, create personal entertainment through family albums, and participate in visual culture that had previously been limited to wealthy families who could afford painted portraits. Photography made it possible to preserve memories of entertainment experiences, share recreational activities with distant friends and family, and create new forms of social interaction around image sharing and viewing. But photography also created new opportunities for inappropriate entertainment. The same technology that allowed families to document their respectable leisure activities could be used to create and distribute images that violated social standards of moral decency. The Victorian era saw the emergence of the first commercial pornography industry, enabled by photographic technology that made visual reproduction cheap and widespread. The social response was predictably restrictive. Photography studios were regulated to ensure appropriate content. Family photography was subject to moral guidelines that governed poses, clothing, and settings. Even innocent family entertainment photography had to navigate complex social protocols designed to ensure that visual documentation of leisure activities didn't violate standards of propriety and respectability. The printing revolution created the most dramatic transformation in Victorian entertainment culture. Steam-powered printing presses, improved paper production, and railway distribution networks made it possible to produce and distribute printed entertainment at unprecedented scale and speed. The result was the birth of mass media as a commercial entertainment industry. The penny press created the first mass-market newspapers, making current events and popular culture accessible to working-class readers for the first time. Penny Dreadfuls provided sensational entertainment featuring characters like Sweeney Todd and Spring-Heeled Jack, distributed weekly to audiences of over 1 million readers by the 1860s to 1870s. Railway bookstalls made entertainment literature available at every train station, creating a national distribution network for popular culture. But the most significant impact was on family entertainment. Cheap books, magazines, and periodicals made reading culture accessible to families who had never been able to afford extensive personal libraries. Serialized novels allowed middle-class families to participate in shared cultural experiences, reading the latest Dickens installment together and discussing plot developments with neighbors and friends. Sheet music distribution allowed families to perform the latest popular songs in their homes, participating in national cultural trends that had previously been limited to urban audiences with access to live performance venues. The democratization of printed entertainment created cultural opportunities, but it also generated massive social anxiety among established authorities who had previously controlled cultural production and distribution. If anyone could publish anything and distribute it widely, how could society maintain appropriate moral standards and cultural hierarchies? The response was a complex system of cultural gatekeeping that combined legal restrictions, economic barriers, and social pressure to channel technological possibilities into socially acceptable directions. Licensing requirements for publishers, content restrictions for various categories of printed material, and social pressure on families to choose appropriate reading material all serve to limit the disruptive potential of printing technology. But technology is inherently subversive of social control, and the printing revolution ultimately transformed entertainment culture in ways that Victorian authorities couldn't contain. The emergence of genuinely popular culture, entertainment created by and for ordinary people rather than cultural elites, represented a fundamental shift in social power that would have lasting consequences for traditional hierarchies. The technological entertainment revolution also created new forms of social interaction and community formation. Families who owned magic lanterns could invite neighbors for evening shows, creating social networks based on shared access to entertainment technology. Phonograph owners became centers of social activity, with friends gathering to hear the latest recordings. Photography created new opportunities for social documentation and memory preservation that strengthened community bonds while creating new forms of social competition. But technology also isolated people in ways that prefigured modern concerns about entertainment and social connection. Families could now entertain themselves privately using technological devices rather than participating in community-based entertainment activities. The Magic Lantern Show in your parlor replaced attendance at public entertainment venues. Recorded music replaced participation in live musical performance. Photography replaced participation in visual arts communities. The Victorian technological entertainment revolution established patterns that continue to shape contemporary entertainment culture. The tension between technological possibility and social control, the democratization of entertainment production and consumption, the disruption of traditional cultural gatekeeping, and the transformation of social interaction through entertainment technology. All of these began in Victorian parlors and entertainment venues. What makes the Victorian technological revolution particularly significant is how it established the template for our ongoing relationship with entertainment technology. Every time new technology promises to democratize entertainment while authorities worry about social disruption, every time technological innovation outpaces social adaptation, every time we debate the appropriate uses of entertainment technology, we're recreating debates that began when Victorian families first gathered around magic lanterns and phonographs. The Victorians were the first people to grapple with entertainment technology that could escape traditional social control, and their response is a combination of moral panic, commercial opportunism, and desperate attempts at regulation. established patterns that continue to shape how society responds to entertainment innovation today. They may not have anticipated Netflix, but they invented the social dynamics that would govern its reception. Just as Victorian technology was democratizing entertainment in ways that terrified social authorities, another revolution was taking place on playing fields across Britain. The Victorians were systematically transforming the ancient human pleasure of physical activity into something far more sinister: organized sports. What had once been spontaneous community games became elaborate systems of rules, regulations, and social hierarchies that turned simple fun into competitive displays of class distinction, moral virtue, and national character. Welcome to Victorian sports culture, where even kicking a ball around required a committee, a rule book, and careful consideration of the moral implications of enjoying yourself too much. The Victorian approach to sports reveals their genius for taking anything pleasurable and making it complicated, anxiety-inducing, and socially divisive. They couldn't just let people run around and have fun. They had to create governing bodies, establish official rules, build exclusive venues, and turn every game into an opportunity for moral instruction and class reinforcement. It was social engineering disguised as recreation, and it established patterns of organized athletics that continue to shape sports culture today. Let's start with cricket, which the Victorians elevated to the status of a secular religion and used as a training ground for empire management. Cricket wasn't just a game. It was a character-building exercise designed to teach young men the virtues of patience, fair play, strategic thinking, and acceptance of hierarchical authority that would serve them well as colonial administrators and military officers. The phrase, "it's not cricket," didn't emerge accidentally. Cricket was deliberately promoted as the embodiment of English moral values, with elaborate codes of sportsmanship that were more important than winning. The game taught players to accept umpire decisions without protest, to maintain emotional control under pressure, and to demonstrate grace in both victory and defeat. These weren't just sporting values, they were training for imperial leadership. But cricket also perfectly illustrated Victorian class distinctions through its elaborate internal hierarchies. County cricket maintained rigid separation between gentlemen, amateur players from upper-class backgrounds, and players, working-class professionals, with separate changing rooms, different entrances to the field, and even different titles on scorecards. The gentlemen were supposed to play for love of the game and moral improvement. The players were tolerated as necessary evils who provided competitive skill in exchange for modest compensation. The social rules governing cricket attendance were as complex as the game itself. Upper-class spectators attended county matches as social events, using cricket grounds as outdoor venues for networking and courtship. Middle-class families treated cricket attendance as educational entertainment that demonstrated their appreciation for proper English values. Working-class spectators were welcome at some venues, but carefully managed to ensure they didn't disrupt the social atmosphere that cricket was supposed to provide. The economic structure of cricket reveals how Victorian sports became vehicles for class exclusion, disguised as merit-based competition. Playing cricket properly required significant financial investment, equipment, coaching, club membership, and most importantly, the leisure time necessary to master a game that could last for days. Cricket clubs maintained expensive facilities, charged substantial membership fees, and operated according to social protocols that effectively excluded anyone who wasn't genuinely prosperous. Football, meanwhile, represented the opposite end of the Victorian sports spectrum, a working-class game that terrified respectable society precisely because it was so democratic and exciting. Early football was essentially organized violence that occasionally involved a ball, with few rules and fewer restrictions on how players could advance toward their objectives. It was dangerous, chaotic, and absolutely thrilling, which made it deeply suspicious to authorities who preferred their sports to be educational and morally improving. The Football Association, formed in 1863, represented a classic Victorian compromise between popular enthusiasm and social control. The FA created standardized rules that reduced the violence while maintaining the excitement, established national competitions that channeled working-class passion into organized channels, and promoted fair play, values that supposedly taught moral lessons about competition and cooperation. But the real genius of organized football was its timing. The Saturday half-holiday, created by the Factory Acts of the 1870s, gave working people their first regular leisure time, just as football was becoming professionally organized. The 3 p.m. Saturday kickoff wasn't arbitrary. It was specifically designed to accommodate workers who finished at 1 p.m. on Saturdays and could travel to matches by public transportation. Football quickly became the primary entertainment outlet for industrial workers, providing tribal identity, social community, and emotional release that working life couldn't offer. Football crowds were notoriously passionate, creating an atmosphere that combined sporting enthusiasm with political expression and social solidarity. Middle-class observers were simultaneously fascinated and horrified by the intensity of working-class football culture. The emergence of professional football created a crisis in Victorian sporting ideology. Amateur athletics were supposed to embody gentlemanly virtues and moral improvement, while professional sports suggested that athletic ability was a commercial commodity rather than a character-building exercise. The FA struggled for decades with the tension between amateur ideals and professional reality, creating elaborate rules and restrictions designed to maintain the fiction that football was about more than entertainment and money. Tennis introduced an entirely new category of sporting controversy: the question of women's athletic participation. When Major Walter Wingfield invented lawn tennis in 1873, he created a sport that was simultaneously suitable for mixed gender participation and scandalous in its implications for women's behavior and social roles. The tennis controversy reveals Victorian gender anxiety at its most absurd. Tennis required women to move quickly, compete directly against opponents, and display themselves in vigorous physical activity, all of which violated basic assumptions about feminine nature and appropriate female behavior. Early tennis costume required women to play in full Victorian dress, including corsets, long skirts, and elaborate hats, making competitive play virtually impossible, while maintaining the fiction that women were engaging in gentle recreation rather than serious athletic competition. The social protocols governing tennis were elaborate enough to require specialized etiquette guides. Women could play tennis, but only in private settings or carefully supervised social gatherings. They could compete against other women, but mixed-gender play required careful chaperoning and restricted competitive intensity. They could enjoy tennis as social recreation, but serious athletic training or public tournament play remained controversial throughout the Victorian period. Tennis clubs became important venues for middle-class social interaction, providing one of the few opportunities for young men and women to interact in relatively informal settings while maintaining social respectability. But even these opportunities were hedged with restrictions designed to ensure that athletic activity didn't compromise moral standards or social proprieties. The bicycle craze of the 1890s created the most significant challenge to Victorian gender restrictions in sports and recreation. Cycling was simultaneously practical transportation, healthy exercise, and tremendous fun, but it required women to wear practical clothing, travel independently, and appear in public engaged in vigorous physical activity. The social controversy over women's cycling reveals how sports became battlegrounds for broader debates about gender roles and social change. Conservative critics argued that cycling was physically dangerous for women, morally inappropriate for ladies, and socially disruptive for families. Progressive advocates argued that cycling provided healthy exercise, practical transportation, and personal freedom that benefited both individuals and society. The bicycle industry responded to these concerns by creating elaborate marketing campaigns designed to make cycling respectable for women while addressing practical concerns about clothing, safety, and social acceptability. Special ladies' bicycles featured modified frames that accommodated skirts, while cycling costume manufacturers created practical clothing that maintained modesty while allowing functional movement. But the real significance of the cycling craze was its demonstration that women wanted and could handle significantly more physical freedom and recreational independence than Victorian gender ideology allowed. The bicycle became a symbol of women's growing demands for social equality, economic independence, and personal autonomy that extended far beyond recreational activities. Sports clubs represented another form of Victorian social organization that used athletic activity to reinforce class distinctions and social hierarchies. Upper-class sporting clubs maintained exclusive membership policies, expensive facilities, and social protocols that effectively created private recreational worlds for wealthy families. These clubs weren't just about sports. They were about maintaining social networks, conducting business relationships, and demonstrating cultural sophistication through recreational choices. Middle-class sporting clubs served similar functions on a smaller scale, providing suburban families with opportunities to participate in organized athletics while demonstrating their respectability and social aspirations. Club membership required financial investment, social sponsorship, and adherence to behavioral standards that distinguished respectable recreational participation from working-class sporting culture. Working-class sporting participation relied heavily on informal organization, workplace sponsorship, and community support. Factory teams, church clubs, and neighborhood organizations provided athletic opportunities for people who couldn't afford private club membership, while creating alternative social structures that operated independently of middle and upper-class sporting institutions. The amateur versus professional distinction became a central obsession in Victorian sports culture, creating elaborate ideological justifications for what were essentially class-based exclusions. Amateur athletics were supposedly about character building, moral improvement, and gentlemanly competition, while professional sports represented the commercialization and degradation of sporting values. But the amateur ideal was fundamentally hypocritical, as it required independent wealth to maintain amateur status while competing at serious levels. Shamateurism, the practice of providing disguised payments to amateur athletes, became widespread as sporting organizations struggled to maintain competitive standards while preserving class distinctions. The Victorian sports revolution established virtually every aspect of modern athletic culture: standardized rules, professional leagues, spectator admission fees, sports journalism, celebrity athletes, international competition, and the concept of sports as both entertainment industry and character-building exercise. They created the infrastructure, ideological framework, and social organization that continues to shape athletic culture today. But they also established the fundamental contradictions that continue to plague organized sports: the tension between amateur ideals and commercial reality, the use of athletic participation to reinforce social inequalities, the exploitation of competitive passion for political and economic purposes, and the transformation of simple physical pleasure into complex systems of social control and cultural performance. Victorian sports culture was simultaneously democratic and elitist, liberating and restrictive, entertaining and educational. It provided genuine opportunities for community building, personal achievement, and social mobility while reinforcing hierarchies of class, gender, and cultural authority that limited those opportunities to selected participants under carefully controlled circumstances. The Victorians had taken the basic human pleasure of physical competition and turned it into an elaborate system of organized suffering that required constant supervision, moral justification, and social regulation to prevent it from becoming too enjoyable. They had invented modern sports, and in doing so, they had figured out how to make even running around outside into a form of competitive anxiety. While Victorians were busy turning simple games into elaborate systems of organized social control, something even more revolutionary was happening in the background. Entrepreneurs were discovering that there was serious money to be made from people's desperate need for distraction, escape, and pleasure. The same era that gave us amateur, sporting ideals and moral recreation was simultaneously creating the world's first modern entertainment industry, a commercial machine designed to extract profit from human misery by selling it back as fun. Welcome to the birth of entertainment as big business, where Victorian capitalism met Victorian leisure anxiety and produced an industry that would fundamentally transform how people relate to pleasure, community, and their own free time. This wasn't just about making money from entertainment. It was about turning entertainment itself into a commodity that could be mass-produced, standardized, marketed, and sold to increasingly sophisticated consumer audiences. The genius of the Victorian entertainment industry was recognizing that different social classes had different entertainment needs and, more importantly, different spending capacities. Instead of trying to create universal entertainment that appealed to everyone, savvy entrepreneurs developed market segmentation strategies that maximize profit by tailoring entertainment products to specific demographic groups while maintaining the social boundaries that kept classes appropriately separated. The result was the first modern entertainment economy, complete with market research, product development, celebrity marketing, seasonal programming, and consumer loyalty strategies that would be perfectly recognizable to contemporary entertainment executives. The Victorians had figured out how to turn fun into a factory system. Let's start with the crown jewel of Victorian commercial entertainment: seaside resorts and the birth of mass tourism. Before the railway age, visiting the seaside was a privilege reserved for wealthy families who could afford weeks-long journeys by private carriage to exclusive coastal destinations. But the completion of the railway network in the 1850s suddenly made coastal travel accessible to working and middle-class families, creating the first mass market for leisure travel in human history. Entrepreneurs immediately recognized the commercial potential. Seaside towns like Brighton, Blackpool, and Margate transformed themselves from sleepy fishing villages into full-scale entertainment destinations designed to accommodate thousands of day trippers and weekend visitors. The scale of this transformation was staggering. Brighton received 73,000 rail passengers in a single weekend in 1850, rising to 132,000 on Easter Monday, 1862. These weren't just transportation statistics. They represented the emergence of entertainment as a mass-market industry. The business model was brilliantly simple. Use railway access to bring urban populations to coastal destinations, then provide them with entertainment, accommodation, food, and activities that they couldn't get at home. Seaside resorts became the first integrated entertainment destinations, combining multiple revenue streams into comprehensive leisure experiences that kept visitors spending money from arrival to departure. The pier became the architectural symbol of commercial seaside entertainment, with over 80 piers constructed by 1900. But piers weren't just scenic walkways. They were sophisticated entertainment venues designed to maximize visitors' spending while providing weather-protected activities that could operate regardless of coastal conditions. Piers featured theaters, concert halls, restaurants, shops, amusement arcade games, and various attractions that charged admission fees while generating additional revenue through concessions and retail sales. The entertainment programming was carefully calibrated to appeal to different market segments while maintaining appropriate social boundaries. Seaside resorts offered family-friendly attractions during daylight hours, more adult-oriented entertainment in the evenings, and special events designed to attract repeat visitors throughout the tourist season. The variety shows, concerts, and theatrical performances were specifically designed for tourist audiences who wanted entertainment that was more exciting than what they could find at home, but not so sophisticated that it intimidated middle-class visitors. Music halls represented another category of entertainment entrepreneurship that transformed working-class leisure from informal pub entertainment into professionally managed commercial spectacle. The evolution from Charles Morton's Canterbury Hall in 1852 to the sophisticated music hall chains of the 1890s demonstrates how quickly Victorian entrepreneurs learned to scale entertainment operations for maximum profitability. The business model combined several revenue streams. Admission fees carefully priced for working-class affordability, typically 2 to 6 pence. Food and drink sales throughout the performance, and rental income from performers who paid for stage access. By 1875, Greater London alone hosted 375 music halls, representing a substantial entertainment economy that employed thousands of performers, managers, technicians, and support staff. Music hall programming was driven by commercial considerations rather than artistic or moral standards. Successful acts were those that could generate audience enthusiasm, encourage repeat attendance, and create word-of-mouth marketing that brought new customers. The content was deliberately populist, featuring songs and comedy that celebrated working-class values while providing escape from working-class conditions. The music hall industry also created the first modern celebrity culture, with performers like Marie Lloyd, Dan Leno, and Harry Lauder becoming nationally recognized entertainment brands. These weren't just talented performers. They were commercial properties whose names could sell tickets, merchandise, and sheet music to audiences across the country. The star system that dominates contemporary entertainment culture began in Victorian music halls, where talented performers learned to combine artistic ability with commercial appeal to build sustainable entertainment careers. Popular fads and crazes provided another avenue for entertainment entrepreneurship, demonstrating how quickly commercial interests could mobilize to capitalize on emerging leisure trends. The roller skating craze of the 1870s and 1880s illustrates this pattern perfectly, with entrepreneurs rapidly building skating rinks to meet demand that seemed to emerge overnight. At the peak of the roller skating craze, London alone hosted 50 skating rinks operating simultaneously, each charging admission fees while providing skate rental, instruction, and refreshment services. The rinks weren't just recreational facilities. They were entertainment venues that combined physical activity with social interaction, musical accompaniment, and various special events designed to encourage regular attendance. The cycling mania of the 1890s created an even larger commercial opportunity, with bicycle manufacturing, accessory production, cycling clothing, specialized publications, and cycling tourism all emerging as profitable industries. Cycling clubs, touring organizations, and competitive events created ongoing revenue opportunities while building customer loyalty and community engagement around cycling activities. But these fads also revealed the volatile nature of entertainment commerce. The roller skating craze collapsed almost as quickly as it had emerged, leaving entrepreneurs with expensive facilities and equipment that had little value once public interest moved on to other activities. The entertainment industry was learning painful lessons about market timing, trend prediction, and the risks of overinvestment in temporary enthusiasms. The penny dreadful industry demonstrates how technological innovation combined with commercial opportunity to create entirely new forms of mass entertainment. Publishers like Lloyd, Reynolds, and newsagent achieved unprecedented scale by the 1850s, with weekly sales exceeding 1 million copies by the 1860s to 1870s. This wasn't just publishing, it was industrial-scale entertainment production that used standardized formatting, serialized content, and mass distribution to reach working-class audiences who had never been able to afford regular entertainment reading. The business model was precisely calculated for working-class purchasing power. 1 penny was affordable for most working families, but the weekly publication schedule created ongoing revenue streams that generated substantial profits through volume sales. Publishers discovered that serialized stories created customer loyalty and repeat purchasing that was far more profitable than single publication sales. The content was market-driven rather than literary, featuring characters like Sweeney Todd, Varney the Vampire, and Spring-Heeled Jack who became popular culture icons. Publishers tracked sales data to identify successful story types, character archetypes, and narrative formulas that could be reproduced and varied to maintain audience interest while minimizing production costs. The commercial entertainment industry also created new forms of employment that didn't exist in traditional economic sectors. Professional entertainers, venue managers, booking agents, entertainment writers, technical specialists, and various support occupations emerged as entertainment commerce became large enough to sustain specialized labor markets. These weren't just jobs. They were career paths that allowed talented individuals to build professional identities around entertainment skills. Successful music hall performers could achieve financial independence and social mobility that would have been impossible in traditional working-class occupations. Entertainment entrepreneurship provided opportunities for business development and wealth creation that operated independently of established economic hierarchies. The seasonal nature of much Victorian entertainment created a complex economy of temporary employment. Traveling performers, and variable business operations that required sophisticated management strategies. Seaside resorts operated at capacity during summer months, but faced significant challenges maintaining profitable operations during off-season periods. Music halls adjusted their programming and pricing strategies to accommodate seasonal variations in audience availability and spending capacity. Entertainment businesses learned to develop diversified operations that could generate revenue through multiple channels while managing the risks associated with audience preferences, economic conditions, and competitive pressures. Successful entertainment entrepreneurs were those who could combine artistic understanding with business acumen to create sustainable commercial enterprises in an industry that was inherently unpredictable and subject to rapid change. The Victorian entertainment industry also established the marketing and promotional strategies that continue to shape entertainment commerce today. Celebrity endorsements, publicity campaigns, critical reviews, and audience testimonials all emerged as commercial tools for building audience interest and encouraging attendance. Entertainment venues invested heavily in facilities, decor, and customer experience design that would differentiate their offerings from competitors while justifying their pricing strategies. The theater district, music hall circuits, and resort destination development all represented attempts to create entertainment brands that could command customer loyalty and premium pricing. But perhaps most significantly, the Victorian entertainment industry established the fundamental business model that continues to dominate leisure commerce. The transformation of human needs for pleasure, escape, and social connection into commercial products that can be produced, marketed, and sold for profit. This wasn't just about making money from entertainment. It was about reconceptualizing entertainment itself as a commodity rather than a community activity. Where traditional leisure had been based on shared participation, local culture, and informal social organization, commercial entertainment created professional consumer relationships that separated entertainment production from entertainment consumption. The Victorians had invented the entertainment industry, and in doing so, they had fundamentally altered the relationship between people and their own pleasure. Entertainment was no longer something communities created for themselves. It was something they purchased from commercial providers who specialized in producing leisure experiences for mass consumption. This transformation had profound social implications that extended far beyond entertainment venues and business operations. It established patterns of leisure consumption, celebrity worship, and commercial manipulation of human desires that continue to shape entertainment culture today. The Victorian entertainment entrepreneurs had figured out how to turn fun into a factory system, and society is still living with the consequences of their success. Now that we've established how Victorian entrepreneurs figured out how to monetize human misery and sell it back as entertainment, it's time to explore how this commercial leisure revolution played out across the dramatically different landscapes of Britain. Because while the basic principles of Victorian entertainment, class anxiety, moral improvement, and competitive suffering, were universal, the specific ways that different regions implemented these principles created a fascinating patchwork of local torture methods that reflected everything from industrial economics to ancient cultural traditions. The beauty of Victorian regional entertainment variations is that they reveal how the same fundamental social pressures could produce completely different forms of recreational misery, depending on local conditions, economic structures, and cultural inheritance. A coal miner in Newcastle, a cotton worker in Manchester, a sheep farmer in Yorkshire, and a dock worker in Liverpool might all be struggling with the same basic problems: exhaustion, poverty, and social displacement. But their solutions look completely different depending on where they happen to live. Let's start with London, which functioned as the entertainment capital not just of Britain, but of the entire English-speaking world. London wasn't just participating in the Victorian leisure revolution. It was manufacturing it, exporting it, and profiting from it on a scale that made every other British city look like a provincial backwater. London's entertainment industry was so sophisticated and comprehensive that it operated almost like a separate economy within the larger metropolitan system. The West End Theatre District, the music hall circuits of East London, the pleasure gardens of South London, the gentlemen's clubs of St. James's, the sporting venues scattered across the metropolis. All of this created an entertainment infrastructure that could accommodate virtually any recreational desire, provided you had the money and social standing to access it appropriately. But London's entertainment dominance came with its own special forms of torture. The sheer scale and sophistication of London leisure created competitive pressures that didn't exist in smaller cities. If you were wealthy enough to participate in London's elite entertainment culture, you weren't just competing with your neighbors. You were competing with the most sophisticated and well-connected families in the empire. The stakes were higher, the costs were greater, and the social consequences of recreational failure were more severe. London's working class faced different but equally distinctive challenges. Yes, London had more music halls, more pubs, more street entertainment, and more recreational opportunities than anywhere else in Britain. But London also had higher costs, more social surveillance, and more competition for recreational space and resources. A working-class family in London might have access to entertainment options that were unavailable in provincial cities, but they also faced housing costs, transportation expenses, and social pressures that made those options effectively inaccessible. The result was a peculiar form of metropolitan entertainment inequality where London simultaneously offered the best and worst recreational experiences in Britain, often within walking distance of each other. You could attend the finest opera performance in Europe at Covent Garden, while just a few streets away, families were crowding into basement music halls that violated every conceivable safety regulation. Industrial cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool developed entertainment cultures that were shaped by the specific demands and constraints of factory production, urban crowding, and rapid social change. These were cities that had been built around industrial efficiency rather than human comfort, and their entertainment systems reflected the same priorities. Maximum impact for minimum investment, designed to get workers through their limited leisure time and back to productive labor as quickly as possible. Manchester, as the epicenter of textile production, developed an entertainment culture built around the Saturday half-holiday and Sunday activities that could accommodate the rhythm of factory work. The city's music halls, sporting venues, and public houses were specifically designed to serve workers who had limited time, limited money, and unlimited need for escape from industrial monotony. But Manchester also pioneered some of the most innovative approaches to working-class entertainment improvement. The city's mechanics institutes, workers' educational associations, and cooperative entertainment ventures represented genuine attempts to provide alternative recreational opportunities that didn't rely on alcohol, gambling, or commercial exploitation. These efforts were often paternalistic and morally intrusive, but they also demonstrated real concern for working-class welfare that was largely absent in other industrial centers. Birmingham's entertainment culture reflected the city's role as a center of small-scale manufacturing and skilled trade work. Birmingham workers generally had slightly higher incomes and more varied employment than textile workers in Manchester, and the city's entertainment options reflected this relative prosperity. Birmingham developed a particularly sophisticated pub culture with elaborate sporting competitions, musical performances, and social organizations that created genuine community networks around recreational activities. Liverpool's position as a major port created an entertainment culture that was more cosmopolitan and ethnically diverse than other industrial cities. Liverpool's music halls featured performers and musical styles from around the world, reflecting the city's connections to international trade and immigration. The city's pub culture incorporated influences from Irish, Welsh, and international maritime communities, creating recreational traditions that were distinctively different from the more homogeneous entertainment cultures of inland industrial cities. But Liverpool also demonstrated the dark side of cosmopolitan entertainment culture. The city's recreational venues were often associated with prostitution, international crime networks, and various forms of exploitation that took advantage of transient maritime populations. Liverpool's entertainment industry was simultaneously more exciting and more dangerous than entertainment in other British cities, reflecting the opportunities and risks associated with international commerce. Rural Britain presented an entirely different set of recreational challenges and opportunities. In agricultural regions, entertainment was still largely organized around seasonal rhythms, community traditions, and extended family networks that had been disrupted but not completely destroyed by industrialization. Rural entertainment was less commercialized, less class-segregated, and more closely connected to traditional cultural practices than urban leisure activities. Village fairs, harvest festivals, church socials, and agricultural shows provided recreational opportunities that combined entertainment with community business, social networking, and cultural transmission. These events weren't just fun. They were essential mechanisms for maintaining rural social organization and economic cooperation. But rural entertainment was also more limited, more socially constraining, and more vulnerable to economic and cultural pressure from urban centers. Rural communities couldn't support the variety of entertainment options available in cities, and rural residents who wanted more sophisticated recreational experiences often had to travel to urban areas or do without. The railway revolution partially addressed this limitation by making urban entertainment accessible to rural residents, but it also created new forms of recreational inequality. Rural families who could afford railway travel could participate in urban entertainment culture, while those who couldn't afford travel costs were increasingly isolated from national recreational trends. Scotland developed entertainment traditions that reflected the country's distinctive cultural heritage, economic structure, and relationship with English political authority. Scottish entertainment culture was simultaneously more traditional and more innovative than English recreational patterns, combining ancient Highland customs with modern industrial recreational needs. The Highland Games represented a uniquely Scottish solution to the Victorian challenge of organizing traditional recreational activities around modern commercial and social requirements. The Games combined athletic competition, cultural performance, and social gathering in ways that celebrated Scottish identity while accommodating Victorian requirements for organized, morally improving recreational activities. But Scottish entertainment culture also reflected the economic and social devastation caused by the Highland clearances, industrial development, and cultural suppression. Many traditional Scottish recreational activities have been displaced or destroyed by economic and political pressure, creating cultural losses that couldn't be replaced by organized Highland Games or commercial entertainment imports from England. Edinburgh developed a particularly sophisticated entertainment culture that combined Scottish cultural traditions with cosmopolitan intellectual and artistic activities. The city's position as Scotland's cultural and educational center created recreational opportunities that were distinctively Scottish, but also connected to broader European intellectual and artistic movements. Glasgow, as Scotland's industrial center, developed working-class entertainment culture that was similar to English industrial cities, but with distinctive Scottish characteristics. Glasgow's pub culture, music hall entertainment, and sporting activities reflected both Scottish cultural traditions and the specific demands of Scottish industrial development. The geographic constraints of different regions created additional variations in entertainment culture that reflected local environmental conditions and transportation limitations. Coastal regions developed recreational traditions based on maritime activities, seasonal tourism, and connection to international trade networks. Mountain regions developed entertainment cultures based on seasonal isolation, traditional crafts, and agricultural rhythms. River valleys developed recreational traditions based on water transportation, seasonal flooding, and connections between rural and urban areas. These geographic variations weren't just picturesque local color. They represented fundamental differences in how communities organize social life, economic activity, and cultural transmission. Entertainment patterns that worked well in one geographic setting might be completely inappropriate or impossible in different environmental conditions. The religious landscape also created significant regional variations in entertainment culture. Areas with strong Methodist, Baptist, or other nonconformist religious traditions developed recreational activities that emphasized moral improvement, family participation, and community service. Catholic regions, particularly in Ireland and parts of Scotland, maintained entertainment traditions that were more accepting of music, dancing, and social celebration. Anglican regions developed entertainment cultures that reflected the established church's more relaxed approach to recreational activities, but also the social conservatism associated with traditional religious and political authority. These religious differences created distinctively different approaches to Sunday activities, holiday celebrations, and the appropriate relationship between religious obligation and recreational pleasure. Economic specialization also created regional entertainment variations that reflected local industrial and agricultural activities. Mining regions developed recreational traditions based on shift work, dangerous employment, and tight-knit community solidarity. Agricultural regions maintained entertainment patterns based on seasonal work rhythms, extended family networks, and connection to land and traditional cultural practices. Textile regions developed entertainment cultures that reflected the particular demands of factory work, the predominance of female employment, and the social disruption caused by rapid urbanization. Each type of economic specialization created different recreational needs, different community resources, and different cultural traditions that shaped local entertainment patterns. What makes Victorian regional entertainment variations particularly fascinating is how they reveal the complex interaction between national cultural trends and local social conditions. The same basic entertainment forms, music halls, sporting clubs, seaside holidays, pub culture, appeared throughout Britain, but they were adapted to local conditions in ways that created genuinely distinctive regional entertainment cultures. These regional variations also demonstrate how entertainment culture both reflected and shaped social and economic development patterns. Regions with more sophisticated entertainment infrastructure often attracted more economic investment, more cultural development, and more social innovation. Entertainment wasn't just a reflection of regional prosperity. It was a contributing factor to regional development and competition. The Victorian period established regional entertainment patterns that continue to influence British cultural geography today. The concentration of entertainment industry infrastructure in London, the distinctive working-class recreational cultures of industrial cities, the tourism development of coastal regions, and the cultural preservation efforts of rural and ethnic communities all began during the Victorian era and continue to shape British entertainment culture. But perhaps most importantly, Victorian regional entertainment variations demonstrate how the same fundamental social pressures and commercial opportunities could produce completely different recreational outcomes, depending on local conditions, cultural traditions, and community resources. There was no single Victorian entertainment experience. There were dozens of different regional approaches to the same basic challenge of organizing human pleasure around industrial economic requirements and modern social expectations. The Victorians had created a national entertainment culture, but it was a culture that expressed itself through countless local variations that reflected the wonderful complexity and stubborn particularity of British regional identity. Even their suffering was regionally specific. Having established how different regions of Britain developed their own distinctive methods of recreational torture, we now turn to perhaps the most insidious Victorian contribution to human suffering: the systematic transformation of traditional seasonal celebrations into elaborate exercises in commercial exploitation, family stress, and competitive holiday performance. The Victorians didn't just participate in seasonal festivals, they completely reinvented them, turning ancient community celebrations into modern holidays that combine the worst aspects of commercial pressure, domestic obligation, and social anxiety into neat seasonal packages. Welcome to Victoria holiday culture, where even rest days required so much preparation and performance that they were more exhausting than regular work, and where traditional celebrations were transformed into elaborate displays of cultural sophistication, family harmony, and economic success that nobody could actually achieve, but everyone was expected to attempt. The Victorian approach to holidays reveals their particular genius for taking anything that was supposed to be enjoyable and making it into a source of stress, competition, and social judgment. They couldn't just let people celebrate. They had to create elaborate protocols, expensive traditions, and moral expectations that turned seasonal pleasure into seasonal suffering, while somehow managing to convince everyone that this was an improvement over traditional celebrations. Let's start with the Victorian transformation of Christmas, which represents possibly the most successful rebranding campaign in human history. The Victorians took a religious holiday that had been celebrated through community festivities, religious observance, and various forms of seasonal excess, and turned it into a domestic performance art that required months of preparation, significant financial investment, and the successful orchestration of family harmony under circumstances specifically designed to make family harmony impossible. The Christmas transformation began with Prince Albert's introduction of the German Christmas tree tradition to British royal celebrations in the 1840s. The famous 1848 illustrated London News drawing of the royal family gathered around their Christmas tree wasn't just documenting a royal custom. It was marketing a new form of domestic entertainment that would require British families to completely reconfigure their holiday expectations and preparations. The Christmas tree wasn't just a decoration. It was a complex domestic project that required families to acquire, transport, install, and decorate a large piece of vegetation in their homes during the darkest, dampest part of the winter. This sounds simple until you consider the logistics involved for Victorian families living in small urban dwellings without central heating, electric lighting, or modern transportation. Getting a Christmas tree home and keeping it alive long enough to serve its decorative purpose was a significant domestic undertaking that created new categories of holiday stress. But the tree was just the beginning. Victorian Christmas required elaborate gift-giving that was supposedly about family affection, but actually functioned as a complex system of social obligation, economic demonstration, and relationship negotiation. Gift-giving wasn't casual or spontaneous. It required careful planning, significant financial investment, and detailed knowledge of social protocols governing appropriate gifts for different family relationships and social positions. The Victorian gift economy created impossible expectations that guaranteed disappointment and family conflict. Gifts had to be thoughtful enough to demonstrate genuine affection, expensive enough to show proper respect, practical enough to be useful, and surprising enough to be entertaining. They also had to be appropriate for the recipient's age, gender, social position, and relationship to the giver, while staying within family budgets that were already stretched by holiday food, decorations, and entertainment expenses. Christmas cards, invented by Sir Henry Cole in 1843, represented another Victorian innovation that transformed seasonal greeting into commercial obligation. What started as a convenient way to maintain social connections during the holiday season quickly became an elaborate system of social accounting that required families to track their social relationships, purchase appropriate cards for different categories of recipients, and maintain correspondence that demonstrated their cultural sophistication and social connections. The Christmas card industry reveals how quickly Victorian entrepreneurs could identify and monetize new forms of social obligation. By the 1870s, Christmas card production had become a major commercial enterprise with elaborate artistic designs, expensive production materials, and sophisticated marketing campaigns that convinced families they needed to purchase cards for increasingly extended networks of social relationships. Christmas crackers, invented by Tom Smith in the 1840s to 1860s, demonstrate the Victorian genius for taking simple pleasures and making them complicated and expensive. Early Christmas crackers contained substantial gifts including jewelry, perfume, and expensive trinkets, turning them into significant financial investments disguised as festive entertainment. The crackers weren't just holiday treats. They were elaborate gift delivery systems that required careful purchasing decisions and created additional expectations for holiday generosity. But the real innovation of Victorian Christmas was the transformation of holiday celebration from community festival to domestic performance. Traditional Christmas celebrations have been public, communal, and largely organized by community institutions like churches, guilds, and local authorities. Victorian Christmas became a private, domestic responsibility that required individual families to create successful holiday experiences through their own planning, resources, and organizational skills. This privatization of holiday celebration created enormous pressure on Victorian families, particularly women, who became responsible for creating magical Christmas experiences that met increasingly elaborate cultural expectations. Victorian Christmas required successful coordination of gift purchasing, meal preparation, home decoration, family entertainment, and social obligations while maintaining the fiction that all of this elaborate preparation was effortless and natural. The Christmas dinner represented the culmination of Victorian holiday domestic performance, requiring families to prepare elaborate multi-course meals that demonstrated their prosperity, cultural sophistication, and domestic competence. The traditional Christmas goose, or turkey, wasn't just food. It was a centerpiece that required significant financial investment, careful preparation, and successful presentation to family members who would judge the meal's success as a reflection of the family's overall social standing. Victorian Christmas entertainment featured dangerous games that would horrify modern parents but were considered essential holiday fun. Snapdragon involved participants grabbing burning raisins from flaming brandy bowls, creating entertainment that combined the excitement of fire with the challenge of alcohol consumption and the risk of serious burns. Blind Man's Buff in crowded Victorian parlors filled with furniture and decorations regularly resulted in injuries that were considered acceptable holiday hazards. These games weren't accidents. They were deliberate attempts to create exciting holiday entertainment that would distinguish Christmas from ordinary domestic life. The danger was part of the appeal, providing adrenaline and excitement that couldn't be found in regular family activities while creating shared experiences that would become treasured holiday memories. Easter traditions emerged as the second most important Victorian holiday transformation, with Easter cards becoming the fourth most popular greeting card category by the 1870s. Easter combined religious observance with spring celebration, creating opportunities for both spiritual improvement and social display that appealed to Victorian sensibilities about appropriate holiday celebration. Easter parades became important venues for displaying spring fashions and social status, with families using church attendance and post-service social activities to demonstrate their prosperity and cultural sophistication. The Easter parade wasn't just religious observance. It was fashion show, social networking event, and community status display rolled into one carefully choreographed holiday performance. John Cadbury's introduction of solid chocolate Easter eggs in 1842 created another commercial holiday tradition that transformed religious celebration into consumer opportunity. Easter eggs weren't just seasonal treats. They were elaborate confections that demonstrated families' ability to purchase luxury items for purely pleasure-based consumption, marking a significant shift in working and middle-class spending patterns. The Victorian creation of bank holidays represented a revolutionary development in the concept of leisure time that had far-reaching implications for holiday celebration and recreational culture. The Bank Holidays Act of 1871 created official non-working days that were separate from religious observances, establishing the principle that recreational time was a civic right rather than a religious privilege. But Victorian bank holidays also revealed the limitations of legislated leisure in a society that hadn't developed appropriate infrastructure or cultural practices for mass recreational time. Sudden provision of official holidays for populations that had limited recreational resources and no tradition of organized leisure time created new forms of social problems and entertainment pressures. Bank holiday crowds at seaside resorts, public parks, and entertainment venues often overwhelmed available facilities, creating conditions that were more chaotic and uncomfortable than restful or enjoyable. The first bank holidays demonstrated that providing time off wasn't the same as providing recreational opportunities, and that successful leisure required social organization and commercial infrastructure that didn't yet exist. Seasonal outdoor activities created additional categories of weather-dependent entertainment that reflected Victorian determination to find recreational opportunities regardless of environmental conditions. Victorian families developed elaborate protocols for seasonal entertainment that combined outdoor activities with indoor alternatives, creating flexible recreational programs that could accommodate British weather while maintaining family entertainment schedules. Spring activities centered around the revival of outdoor entertainment after winter confinement, with families organizing garden parties, outdoor games, and countryside excursions that celebrated the return of tolerable weather. But spring entertainment also required careful navigation of unpredictable weather conditions, with elaborate contingency planning for indoor alternatives when outdoor activities became impossible. Summer entertainment reached its peak with organized seaside holidays, countryside excursions, and outdoor sporting activities that took advantage of extended daylight and improved weather conditions. Victorian summer holidays weren't just vacations. They were elaborate family productions that required months of planning, significant financial investment, and successful coordination of transportation, accommodation, and entertainment activities. Autumn celebrations combined harvest traditions with preparation for winter entertainment, creating seasonal transitions that honored agricultural rhythms while accommodating urban recreational needs. Harvest festivals, country fairs, and traditional autumn celebrations provided opportunities for community gathering and cultural preservation while adapting to modern commercial and social requirements. Winter entertainment focused on indoor activities and holiday celebrations that could provide warmth, light, and social connection during the darkest part of the year. Victorian winter entertainment revealed both the importance of seasonal celebration for psychological survival and the elaborate cultural mechanisms required to maintain community morale during difficult environmental conditions. Class differences in holiday celebration reflected broader Victorian social inequalities while creating additional sources of holiday stress and social pressure. Working-class families faced the challenge of participating in holiday traditions that required financial resources they couldn't afford, creating tension between cultural expectations and economic reality. Middle-class families bore the burden of creating holiday celebrations that demonstrated their respectability and cultural sophistication while staying within budgets that were already stretched by other social obligations. Middle-class holiday celebration required careful balance between appropriate generosity and financial prudence, creating stress and anxiety that often undermined the pleasure these celebrations were supposed to provide. Upper-class holiday celebrations operated according to social protocols that required extensive preparation, elaborate entertainment, and careful attention to precedent and tradition. Wealthy families faced pressure to maintain holiday standards that reflected their social position, while providing leadership for community celebration that met increasingly complex cultural expectations. The commercialization of traditional festivals created new relationships between community celebration and economic activity that transformed the fundamental nature of seasonal observance. Traditional festivals had been community-organized events that drew on shared cultural resources and voluntary participation. Victorian holidays became commercial enterprises that required individual purchasing decisions and private financial investment while maintaining the fiction that they were spontaneous community celebrations. This commercialization wasn't just about making money from holidays. It was about transforming the relationship between individuals and seasonal celebration. Where traditional festivals had been collective activities that strengthened community bonds, Victorian holidays became individual responsibilities that created competition, stress, and social comparison, while isolating families in private celebrations that required successful performance rather than genuine community participation. The Victorian holiday transformation established patterns of seasonal celebration that continue to dominate contemporary holiday culture. The combination of commercial pressure, family obligation, domestic performance, and social competition that characterizes modern Christmas, Easter, and other seasonal celebrations originated in Victorian attempts to create appropriate modern substitutes for traditional community festivals. But perhaps most significantly, Victorian holiday culture established the principle that seasonal celebration should be work rather than rest, performance rather than spontaneous joy, and individual responsibility rather than community activity. They had taken the basic human need for seasonal celebration and turned it into another form of competitive social obligation that guaranteed exhaustion rather than renewal. The Victorians had invented modern holiday stress, and they had convinced everyone that this was an improvement over traditional seasonal celebration. They had figured out how to make even rest into a form of organized suffering. Having witnessed how the Victorians systematically transformed even seasonal celebrations into elaborate exercises in competitive suffering, we arrive at perhaps the most depressing realization of all. They didn't just ruin entertainment for themselves. They established patterns that continue to dominate leisure culture today. Every time you feel anxious about your vacation plans, guilty about your entertainment choices, or exhausted by your holiday preparations, you're experiencing the direct descendant of Victorian recreational anxiety that was specifically designed to make leisure into a form of socially productive labor. The Victorian entertainment revolution wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was the foundational moment that created virtually every aspect of modern leisure culture, from organized sports and commercial tourism to the entertainment industry and social media. We're still living within frameworks that anxious Victorian families established while trying to figure out how to have fun without compromising their social standing, moral purity, or economic security. The genius of Victorian entertainment culture was its durability. They didn't just create temporary solutions to 19th century leisure problems. They established institutional frameworks, commercial systems, and social expectations that proved robust enough to survive massive technological and social changes while maintaining their essential character. The forms have evolved, but the underlying logic of Victorian entertainment culture continues to shape how people relate to their own leisure time. This is the true horror of Victorian entertainment legacy. They figured out how to make fun itself into a form of competitive anxiety that people would voluntarily perpetuate across generations, even after the original social and economic conditions that created these patterns had completely disappeared. Let's start with perhaps the most obvious Victorian entertainment legacy: modern organized sports. The Victorians didn't just play games. They created the entire infrastructure of contemporary athletic culture that now dominates global entertainment and generates billions of dollars in annual revenue, while creating new forms of tribal identity, commercial exploitation, and competitive suffering. Victorian sports innovations established virtually every aspect of modern athletics. Standardized rules that could be applied internationally, professional leagues that could generate sustainable commercial revenue, spectator culture that could support massive venue development, celebrity athlete marketing that could create global entertainment brands, and media coverage that could transform local games into international cultural events. But the Victorian sports legacy goes deeper than organizational structures. They established the ideological framework that continues to justify organized athletics as character-building exercise, community development tool, and social improvement mechanism rather than simple entertainment. The Victorian insistence that sports should be morally improving and socially beneficial created justifications for enormous public investment in athletic facilities, education programs, and professional sports infrastructure that persist despite limited evidence that organized athletics actually delivers the social benefits that supporters claim. The amateur versus professional distinction that dominated Victorian sports culture continues to shape contemporary athletic organization, from college sports amateurism to Olympic eligibility requirements to youth sports participation policies. The Victorian belief that pure athletic competition should be separate from commercial interests created ongoing tension between sporting ideals and economic reality that generates constant controversy and institutional compromise. Most significantly, Victorian sports culture established the pattern of using athletic participation and spectatorship as markers of social identity, community membership, and cultural values that continues to dominate contemporary leisure culture. Sports team loyalty, athletic achievement as personal validation, and competitive recreation as essential social experience all originated in Victorian attempts to create appropriate leisure activities that could build character while providing acceptable outlets for competitive aggression. The Victorian creation of commercial tourism established another enduring legacy that now dominates global economic activity while perpetuating patterns of leisure consumption, environmental exploitation, and cultural commodification that originated in 19th century seaside resort development. Victorian tourism innovations created the template for contemporary travel industry. Package tours that combine transportation and accommodation, destination marketing that promised transformative leisure experiences, recreational infrastructure that could accommodate mass visitor volumes, and commercial entertainment that could generate ongoing revenue from temporary populations. But Victorian tourism also established the fundamental contradiction that continues to plague leisure travel: the promise of escape and renewal through activities that actually require enormous planning, significant financial investment, and successful performance of tourist identity that often proves more exhausting than the regular life that travel was supposed to provide relief from. The Victorian seaside resort model became the prototype for every subsequent form of commercial leisure destination, from ski resorts and theme parks to cruise ships and resort hotels. The combination of transportation access, entertainment programming, accommodation services, and retail opportunities that characterize Victorian seaside destinations established business models that continue to dominate tourism industry development. More troubling is how Victorian tourism established patterns of leisure consumption that treat recreational experiences as commercial products to be purchased rather than community activities to be participated in. The transformation of travel from necessity to commodity, of natural environments into entertainment venues, and of cultural differences into tourist attractions all originated in Victorian commercial tourism development. The entertainment industry itself represents perhaps the most direct Victorian legacy, with organizational structures, commercial strategies, and cultural functions that remain essentially unchanged despite technological innovations that would seem to require completely different approaches to entertainment production and distribution. Victorian music hall culture established the star system that continues to dominate contemporary entertainment, from celebrity marketing and public relations management to fan culture and entertainment media coverage. The relationship between performers and audiences, the commercialization of talent and personality, and the creation of entertainment celebrities as cultural authorities all originated in Victorian music hall entrepreneurship. The content strategies that Victorian entertainment entrepreneurs developed to appeal to different market segments while maintaining appropriate social boundaries established patterns that continue to shape contemporary entertainment programming. Market segmentation based on demographic characteristics, content curation designed to avoid controversy while maximizing audience appeal, and the balancing of artistic integrity with commercial viability all originated in Victorian entertainment business practices. But perhaps most significantly, Victorian entertainment culture established the transformation of leisure from participatory community activity to commercial consumption experience that now dominates contemporary entertainment culture. Where traditional entertainment had been something communities created for themselves through shared participation, Victorian commercial entertainment established the pattern of professional entertainment production for passive consumer audiences that characterizes most contemporary leisure activity. The Victorian invention of the weekend represents another foundational legacy that continues to shape contemporary social organization while perpetuating patterns of work-life balance, leisure consumption, and temporal anxiety that originated in 19th century industrial labor management. The Saturday half-holiday that created Victorian weekend culture established the principle that leisure time should be regularly scheduled, clearly separated from work time, and organized around recreational activities that could provide relief from employment-related stress. This sounds obviously beneficial until you consider how it also established the expectation that leisure time should be productive, purposeful, and successful rather than simply restful or spontaneous. Victorian weekend culture created the template for contemporary leisure anxiety, the pressure to make optimal use of limited free time, the guilt associated with wasted leisure time, and the competitive comparison of leisure activities that turns recreational choices into markers of personal success and social status. The contemporary phenomenon of weekend exhaustion, vacation stress, and leisure burnout all originated in Victorian patterns that treated free time as a resource to be managed efficiently rather than a natural rhythm to be experienced organically. The Victorian weekend established leisure consumption as a form of work that required planning, investment, and successful execution rather than simple rest and recovery. Social institutions represent another category of Victorian entertainment legacy that continues to shape contemporary community organization and cultural development. Victorian innovations in public parks, libraries, museums, social clubs, and recreational facilities established institutional frameworks that persist despite massive changes in social organization and recreational preferences. The Victorian concept of public recreational space as a social improvement tool created justifications for municipal investment in leisure infrastructure that continue to shape urban planning and community development. Public parks, recreational facilities, and cultural institutions are still justified through Victorian arguments about social benefit, community building, and moral improvement rather than simple provision of recreational opportunities. Victorian social club culture established patterns of recreational organization that persist in everything from fitness clubs and hobby groups to professional associations and online communities. The combination of shared interests, social networking, and recreational activity that characterize Victorian club culture continues to dominate contemporary leisure organization despite technological innovations that would seem to make traditional club structures obsolete. The Victorian transformation of cultural institutions like museums, libraries, and galleries from elite preservation societies into public educational resources established the contemporary expectation that leisure activities should combine entertainment with improvement, pleasure with instruction, and individual enjoyment with social benefit. Perhaps most pervasively, Victorian entertainment culture established psychological patterns and social expectations around leisure that continue to shape how individuals relate to their own recreational choices and free time experiences. The Victorian anxiety about appropriate entertainment, moral leisure, and socially beneficial recreation created internalized standards that persist despite the disappearance of the social conditions that originally justified these concerns. The contemporary phenomenon of leisure guilt, the feeling that recreational activities should be somehow productive or improving rather than purely pleasurable, originated in Victorian moral anxiety about idle time and frivolous entertainment. The pressure to document and share leisure experiences through social media represents a direct continuation of Victorian entertainment as social performance and competitive display. The Victorian pattern of recreational consumption as identity expression continues to dominate contemporary leisure culture, from lifestyle marketing and experience economy development to recreational brand loyalty and leisure-based social grouping. The Victorian establishment of entertainment choices as markers of social position, cultural sophistication, and personal values created patterns that persist despite massive changes in economic and social organization. Most troubling is how Victorian entertainment culture established the fundamental relationship between leisure and anxiety that characterizes much contemporary recreational experience. The Victorian transformation of fun into a form of competitive social performance created patterns of leisure stress, recreational comparison, and entertainment anxiety that persist even when objective social and economic pressures have been reduced. The technological innovations that seem to distinguish contemporary entertainment from Victorian leisure culture actually operate within frameworks that Victorian entrepreneurs and social reformers established. Streaming services use market segmentation strategies that originated in Victorian entertainment industry development. Social media platforms replicate Victorian patterns of recreational social performance and competitive cultural display. Video games incorporate Victorian principles of entertainment as character building and skill development rather than pure pleasure. Even the contemporary debates about entertainment technology and social impact directly parallel Victorian controversies about music halls, penny dreadfuls, and commercial leisure. The anxiety about technology disrupting traditional social relationships, the concern about inappropriate content access, and the debate about entertainment industry responsibility for social problems all originated in Victorian attempts to manage the social implications of commercial entertainment development. The Victorian entertainment revolution established the fundamental paradox that continues to characterize contemporary leisure culture. The promise of pleasure, escape, and recreation delivered through systems that create anxiety, competition, and performance pressure. They figured out how to make fun into work, leisure into labor, and recreation into social obligation, while convincing people that this represented progress rather than cultural degradation. The Victorian entertainment legacy isn't just historical influence, it's ongoing cultural domination. We're still living within recreational frameworks that anxious 19th century families created while trying to figure out how to enjoy themselves appropriately. And we're still experiencing the anxiety, competition, and performance pressure that those frameworks were specifically designed to generate. The Victorians didn't just ruin entertainment for themselves. They created self-perpetuating systems of recreational suffering that continue to operate independently of the social conditions that originally justified their development. They established leisure culture as a form of cultural manufacture that generates its own demand while creating its own dissatisfaction. They figured out how to make fun into a problem that could never be permanently solved, only temporarily managed through ongoing consumption of commercial entertainment products and services that promise resolution while guaranteeing continued anxiety. The Victorian entertainment revolution succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and we're still living with the nightmare of their success. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through Victorian entertainment culture, having witnessed 64 years of the most systematic destruction of simple human pleasure in recorded history. We've seen how the Victorians took every conceivable form of recreational activity, from reading books to taking walks, from playing games to celebrating holidays, and transformed them into elaborate exercises in social anxiety, competitive performance, and commercial exploitation that sucked the life out of leisure, while somehow convincing everyone that this represented progress. But here's the truly depressing part. They didn't just ruin entertainment for themselves. They created a self-perpetuating system of recreational suffering that continues to operate today, long after the Victorian social conditions that originally justified these patterns have completely disappeared. Every time you feel stressed about planning the perfect vacation, anxious about your entertainment choices, or exhausted by your leisure activities, you're experiencing the direct descendant of Victorian entertainment culture that was specifically designed to make fun into a form of socially productive work. The Victorian entertainment revolution represents one of the most successful cultural engineering projects in human history. They managed to take something as basic and universal as the human need for pleasure, community, and escape, and transform it into a commercial system that generates its own anxiety while promising to relieve that anxiety through continued consumption of entertainment products and experiences that can never actually deliver the satisfaction they promise. This wasn't an accident or an unintended consequence. The Victorians deliberately created entertainment systems that would reinforce social hierarchies, generate commercial profits, and channel potentially disruptive leisure time into socially acceptable activities that supported rather than challenged existing power structures. They figured out how to make fun into a mechanism of social control, and they did it so successfully that we're still living within the frameworks they established. The fundamental insight of Victorian entertainment culture was recognizing that leisure time represented both an opportunity and a threat. Industrial capitalism had created the first large-scale populations with regular free time and disposable income, but had also disrupted traditional community structures that had previously organized recreational activities around shared cultural values and social cooperation. The Victorian response was to create new forms of entertainment organization that could accommodate modern economic and social conditions while maintaining traditional hierarchies and moral standards. Instead of allowing leisure culture to develop organically from community needs and preferences, they imposed top-down systems that transformed entertainment from participatory community activity into commercial consumption experience. The class-based entertainment system that Victorians established reveals their sophisticated understanding of how leisure could be used to reinforce social distinctions while providing different forms of recreational satisfaction to different demographic groups. Working-class entertainment was designed to provide escape and community solidarity without encouraging dangerous political consciousness or social ambition. Middle-class entertainment was designed to demonstrate respectability and cultural sophistication while providing anxiety relief that didn't compromise social standing. Upper-class entertainment was designed to maintain social exclusivity while creating opportunities for political and economic networking disguised as recreational activity. These class distinctions weren't just about access to different entertainment options. They were about creating entirely different relationships between leisure and social identity that would ensure recreational choices reinforced rather than challenged existing social hierarchies. The working-class pub, the middle-class parlor, and the upper-class country house represented three completely different entertainment universes that served the same basic human needs while maintaining social boundaries that prevented recreational solidarity across class lines. The commercialization of entertainment represented another Victorian innovation that fundamentally transformed the relationship between people and their own pleasure. Traditional leisure had been organized around community participation, shared cultural traditions, and informal social cooperation that strengthened local bonds while preserving cultural knowledge and social skills. Victorian commercial entertainment replaced this participatory culture with professional consumer relationships that separated entertainment production from entertainment consumption while creating market-based recreational experiences that could be standardized, scaled, and optimized for profit rather than community benefit. This transformation wasn't just about making money from entertainment. It was about reconceptualizing leisure itself as a form of economic activity rather than social relationship. Where traditional entertainment had strengthened community bonds through shared participation, commercial entertainment created individual consumption experiences that isolated people within recreational choices while making them dependent on commercial providers for leisure satisfaction. The technological innovations that shaped Victorian entertainment culture established patterns of recreational technology adoption that continue to influence contemporary leisure development. The Victorian experience with magic lanterns, phonographs, photography, and printing technology reveals how new entertainment technologies are consistently promoted through promises of educational improvement and social benefit, while actually functioning as commercial systems that generate ongoing consumption requirements and social comparison pressures. The Victorian pattern of technological entertainment adoption, initial moral panic followed by commercial exploitation, followed by social acceptance, followed by technological obsolescence, established cycles that continue to characterize contemporary entertainment technology development. Every new form of entertainment technology generates the same debates about social impact, appropriate use, and moral implications that Victorian families experienced when confronting magic lanterns and penny dreadfuls. But technology also reveals the limitations of social control systems that attempt to manage recreational choices through moral guidance and commercial regulation. Victorian attempts to channel entertainment technology towards socially beneficial uses consistently failed as commercial interests and consumer preferences drove technological development in directions that authorities couldn't predict or control. The Victorian invention of organized sports represents perhaps their most enduring entertainment legacy, establishing institutional frameworks and cultural expectations that continue to dominate global athletic culture while perpetuating patterns of competitive recreation, celebrity worship, and commercial exploitation that originated in 19th century attempts to create appropriate leisure activities for industrial populations. Victorian sports culture established the fundamental contradiction that continues to characterize organized athletics: the promise of character building, community development, and social improvement delivered through systems that prioritize commercial success, competitive achievement, and entertainment value over actual social benefit or individual development. The amateur versus professional distinctions that dominated Victorian sports culture established ongoing tensions between sporting ideals and economic reality that generate constant controversy, while obscuring the essentially commercial nature of organized athletics. The Victorian insistence that sports should be morally improving and socially beneficial created justifications for enormous public and private investment in athletic infrastructure that persists despite limited evidence that organized sports actually deliver the social benefits that supporters claim. Gender restrictions in Victorian entertainment culture establish patterns of recreational segregation and female exclusion that persist in modified forms despite legal and social changes that have eliminated most formal barriers to women's leisure participation. The Victorian separate spheres ideology created recreational cultures that continue to treat men's and women's entertainment preferences as fundamentally different while maintaining male dominance in public recreational spaces and activities. The Victorian transformation of seasonal celebrations represents another enduring legacy that continues to shape contemporary holiday culture while perpetuating patterns of commercial pressure, family obligation, and social performance that originated in 19th century attempts to create appropriate modern substitutes for traditional community festivals. Victorian holiday innovations established the principle that seasonal celebration should be private family responsibility rather than community activity, commercial consumption rather than shared tradition, and successful performance rather than spontaneous joy. The Christmas, Easter, and holiday traditions that Victorians created continue to generate family stress, financial pressure, and social competition, while promising domestic harmony and seasonal renewal that the celebrations themselves make impossible to achieve. Regional variations in Victorian entertainment culture demonstrate how the same basic commercial and social pressures could produce different forms of recreational suffering depending on local economic conditions, cultural traditions, and community resources. But regional differences also reveal how Victorian entertainment systems were designed to be adaptable enough to accommodate local variations while maintaining essential structural characteristics that ensured commercial profitability and social control regardless of specific local conditions. The entertainment industry that Victorians created established business models, marketing strategies, and audience relationships that continue to dominate contemporary leisure commerce despite technological innovations that would seem to require completely different approaches to entertainment production and distribution. The star system, market segmentation, content curation, and commercial venue development that characterize Victorian entertainment entrepreneurship established templates that persist across multiple technological and cultural transformations. But perhaps the most significant Victorian entertainment legacy is psychological. The establishment of leisure anxiety as a normal and expected aspect of recreational experience. Victorian entertainment culture created internalized standards of appropriate leisure that continue to shape how individuals relate to their own free time, even when objective social and economic pressures have been reduced. The Victorian pattern of recreational choice as identity expression, entertainment as social performance, and leisure as competitive consumption created psychological frameworks that persist independently of the social conditions that originally justified these patterns. Contemporary phenomena like vacation stress, leisure burnout, and entertainment anxiety all originated in Victorian attempts to make fun into a form of socially productive activity that could demonstrate personal virtue and social standing. The most depressing aspect of Victorian entertainment legacy is how successfully they convinced people that commercial, competitive, anxiety-producing forms of leisure represented progress over traditional community-based recreational activities that prioritize participation, cooperation, and shared cultural transmission over individual consumption and social comparison. Victorian entertainment culture established the fundamental pattern of promising relief from modern social pressures through recreational activities that actually reproduce those pressures in leisure contexts. Picture this. You've just been transported back to 1837, the year a teenage queen named Victoria takes the throne and proceeds to give her name to 64 years of the most contradictory era in human history. Congratulations. You're now living in an age that will simultaneously invent the modern weekend and make sure you're too exhausted to enjoy it. Welcome to Victorian Britain, where having fun was like navigating a minefield of moral judgment, social class warfare, and economic brutality. This is the era that gave us Christmas cards and child labor, seaside holidays and 12-hour workdays, organized sports and organized misery. It's a time when your social class didn't just determine where you lived or what you ate. It dictated every single moment of your so-called leisure time. Here's what you need to understand about Victorian entertainment right from the start. There was no such thing as innocent fun. Every game had rules, every activity had moral implications, and every moment of pleasure came with a side order of social anxiety. The Victorians didn't just enjoy themselves. They agonized over whether they should be enjoying themselves, how they should be enjoying themselves, and whether their neighbors were judging them for enjoying themselves incorrectly. But let's back up and set the scene properly, because you're going to need context for the magnificent absurdity you're about to witness. When Victoria became queen in 1837, Britain was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, that charming period when humanity decided that putting entire families to work in factories for 14 hours a day was progress. The majority of the population, we're talking about 80% of people, were working class, which meant they had about as much leisure time as a hamster on a wheel. Their idea of entertainment was collapsing into bed after a day of not dying in a mine or textile mill. Then you had the rapidly expanding middle class, making up about 15 to 25% of the population by the end of the era. These were the people who